Chapter 343. On the way to the camp, the priests of the goddess of wealth had been observing the place. These people who believed in the goddess of wealth had keen insight, especially when it came to the grasp of wealth and business opportunities. Soren didn't know much about the goddess of wealth because she was usually a very low-key god. Even when the new goddess of wealth replaced the old goddess of wealth, people only discovered it hundreds of years later. The reason for this discovery was because the goddess of wealth had upgraded from a lesser divine power to a medium divine power, and at the same time, changed the position of her original clergy. In the past, the goddess of wealth was the goddess of trade and wealth, and now the goddess of wealth was the goddess of trade and wealth. A change in position meant that the amount of godly power she could control had increased by several times. The goddess of wealth, who used to have trade as her core clergy, had a huge fluctuation in her divine power. Once the war affected trade, her power began to be affected because there was basically no way to trade in that kind of situation, and naturally, there was no way to increase her divine power. But as wealth became the core of this lady's clergy, her divine power gradually stabilized, and because the Temple of Wealth became something like a bank, she maintained a strong divine power almost all the time, and because of this she also touched the protection domain of money. Wealth, trade, money and protection. This new successor of the goddess of wealth was only discovered by others at this time. She had already replaced the old goddess of wealth. From then on, the power of the goddess of wealth became a first-class force on the continent, and it occupied an important position in the game of the gods' churches. When Soren first heard of this knowledge, he was also quite surprised, because he didn't think that just by changing the position of her clergy, it could cause such a big change, and let a god who was already on the verge of decline rush to the realm of great divine power in one breath. If it wasn't for the goddess of wealth's strong control of trade, and because the continent's trade was not developed enough, it was very likely that she would be the first god to enter the realm of great divine power in hundreds of years. There were neat rows of brick houses, straight drainage ditches. The layout of the streets was simple and clear, with shops, taverns and blacksmiths, and specially built public toilets. It was not dirty and messy like other towns, and there wasn't even any garbage on the road. Everything here was clean and tidy, and because of this, others even thought that Soren had a slight obsession with cleanliness. "Your Excellency really surprises me." The priest of the Lady of Riches, who was decked in jewels, looked around. She could not help but reveal a thoughtful expression. Then she slowly said, "This place is full of vitality and vitality. That is the aura of wealth. Such a town. As long as there was a stable order, it would soon attract many merchants." The overseas trade was now in the hands of Soren. Port Tylon and the town that was being built in front of them were 2 points. They controlled the direction of the overseas trade route. As long as Soren was willing to open up a little, he could attract a large number of adventurous businessmen. Trade was exactly what the Lady of Wealth needed. It could expand her faith and strengthen her power. The decline of the City of Wealth temporarily affected trade. There was no way to recover from the chaos that happened before in a short period of time. This was also the reason why she came here. "Please?" Soren raised his hand and made an inviting gesture, then turned around and entered the hall. Just as the priest of the Lady of Wealth sat down, Gloria, who was wearing a black witch robe, also appeared in the hall. She glanced at Soren slightly and then nodded gently. "Your Excellency." The priest of the Mistress of Wealth stood up and bowed slightly to Gloria to show her respect. As a representative from the Church of Wealth, she was well aware of Gloria's identity and status, as well as her influence in the Witch Council. She even knew that Gloria had been promoted and rewarded by the Witch Council because she had touched the realm of the legendary witches. Gloria smiled and nodded in response. She reached out and made an inviting gesture as if she was the hostess here. She smiled and said, "Welcome, messenger of the Mistress of Wealth. Your arrival brings light to our humble dwelling." Everyone took their seats. The priest of the Mistress of Wealth glanced at the others, got up and smiled, "Just call me Gold. In fact, I did bring the goodwill of the Mistress of Wealth here." Gold. It was a strange monosyllabic name. The priest named Gold in front of him walked to the center of the hall and slowly said, "It seems that Your Excellency intends to develop this place into a city. I have to admit that Your Excellency has a unique vision. However, if you want to develop the remote outer islands, it will require a considerable amount of manpower and financial resources. As far as I know, although Your Excellency has a close relationship with the Sea Temple, they have not provided any help. On the contrary, a large part of Your Excellency's trade from the outer islands has to be handed over to them." Gold, who was dressed in jewelry, smiled slightly. Her delicate face was full of confidence. She took out a golden card and said seriously, "This is a divine power gold card of the Temple of Wealth. As long as you hold it, you can withdraw 100,000 Kindler from any Temple of Wealth on the continent at any time." She handed the gold card to Soren and smiled confidently, "This is just a gift from us to your excellency. Please don't refuse. This gift is not part of our next deal. Regardless of whether we cooperate or not, this gift only represents our intentions. And to express our gratitude to your excellency for re-establishing the rules of the South Coast and restoring the trade to normal order. 100,000 Kindler." This time, not only Soren, even Gloria next to him was surprised. With Soren's experience, it was not that he had never seen rich people. He had been in contact with a lot of the royal family, churches and so on. However, it was really the first time he saw someone who could give 100,000 Kindler so easily. The Temple of Wealth was really rich. When the 100,000 Kindler fell, even Soren could not help but breathe heavily. Then he smiled and reached out to take it. It would be a waste if he did not take it. He could never have too much money in his hands. Since she had already said that it was free, Soren naturally ate it first. Seeing Soren accept the Divine Power Gold card, the Priest of Wealth showed a satisfied smile at the corner of her mouth. At the same time, her expression became more and more proud. The Temple of Wealth was so confident. No one could refuse them so firmly when they had money to open the way. Gold raised her finger and turned the ruby ring on her index finger. Then she gave a look to a servant next to her. Then someone handed a document to Soren. She was quite confident and said, "The Temple of Wealth has the most powerful strength on the South Coast. The financial resources that your excellency needs to build here can be fully borne by us. At the same time, the Temple of Wealth also controls the largest and most mineral resources on the South Coast. We have a very abundant slave resource and we can replenish the manpower you need at any time. It can be said that compared to the Sea Temple that only squeezes profit from you, we can provide you more. As for what we need, it's just that you open this city to us, give us the free authority to trade overseas, and then build the Temple of Wealth here and let us develop believers for the goddess." Gold looked at Soren with some satisfaction. She believed that the generous conditions she offered could make the other party agree. But what she never expected was that after Soren took a look at the document, he said in a firm tone, "I'm sorry. I'm afraid I can't agree to these conditions." The conditions were actually quite good. The Temple of Wealth provided Soren with funds, manpower and materials. The only requirement was to open up the city's authority, give them the authority to trade overseas, and at the same time, let them develop their faith and build a temple. For Soren, who had just completed the prototype, being able to get the support of the Temple of Wealth could greatly speed up the construction progress, but it was also quite dangerous for him, because of the Sea Temple. Moreover, after Gloria heard the conditions, she was also calm on the surface, but secretly used her spiritual sense to deal with Soren. "You can't agree. The camp is connected to the Shadow Plane. We can't let other forces know about the existence of the Wizard Tower." "Yes." Hearing Gloria's words, Soren suddenly woke up. The value of the Wizard Tower was immeasurable. It must not be known to other forces. So no matter how good the conditions of the Temple of Wealth were, he could not agree. The authority of the city must be firmly in his own hands. Opening up the authority to build a temple would interfere with Soren's influence. Moreover, he relied on the Temple of the Sea behind him. Now that the Temple of the Sea Temple had not yet moved in, if he let the Temple of the Goddess of Wealth enter first, with the petty temper of the Sea Goddess, she might find out about it with Soren. Kim's face was full of astonishment. She did not expect Soren to refuse so firmly. Soren also did not want to be too stiff with the Temple of Wealth, not to mention that they had just given him 100,000 Kindler. So he pondered for a moment and slowly said, "But as my goodwill, I'm willing to open up some of the authority to free trade to the Temple of Wealth. As for other things, I'm afraid I have to ask the Temple of the Sea for their opinion." The Temple of the Sea. Kim could not help but frown. She came here because she knew that the influence of the Temple of the Sea on Soren was far from that great. If he asked the Temple of the Sea, it was basically impossible to agree because the Temple of the Sea also needed faith. This place had not been developed yet. Once it became in existence similar to Port Tylon, the Temple of the Sea would immediately send priests to move in. At that time, how could the Temple of Wealth be allowed to enter? Although the forces of the gods were intricate, the establishment of a temple was like a carrot in a hole. The establishment of a temple meant that the foundation was laid. Look at Port Tylon. The Temple of the Sea and the Temple of the Storm fought countless times, but in the end, there was still no winner because both sides had the support of a temple. Building a temple here was equivalent to building half of a wizard tower. As long as the god standing behind it had not fallen, who had the ability to pull out a temple with divine power in the end. In the Battle of Amber City, so many legendary challenge-level terror knights could not easily take down any of the temples. It could be seen how strong the defense of the temple was. Soren could not allow the power of the temple to enter his territory. Even, if possible, he wanted to exclude the power of the Temple of the Sea from the periphery. This was also the reason why he kept planning to expand the port. There were too many important secrets in the camp. Kim's expression was a little stunned and disappointed, but she did not give up because coming here was her task. When she came, she saw a lot of farmland. She thought so in her heart. Kim could not help but have a little more contempt for Soren. After all, he was just a pirate leader who did not have much business sense. He only thought about the things dug out from the land and did not realize that the greatest wealth here was trade. If she were to build here, the city would definitely be close to the coastal port and directly build a port city. Now, if the port was developed, it was equivalent to laying out two cities. Even if they were relatively close to each other, they would not be connected in the end. With the powerful strength of the Temple of Wealth, it was not impossible to encroach on the port little by little. If they swallowed the port and occupied the core area of trade, then the value of the city here would be reduced a lot. Her excellent business vision made her realize that the port was the key. In the future, the struggle for faith would also be in the bustling port area. Now, the most important thing was the confrontation with the Temple of Sea. If they could not collide head-on, they could only give up part of the benefits to each other and strive to let each other take what they needed. The friction between two powerful gods' churches was a very scary thing. The group of believers from the Temple of Wealth was quickly settled down. When Kim left the hall, she could not help but see some drow warriors, which surprised her quite a bit. She turned around and took a deep look at Soren. Drows. This kind of creature was quite difficult to deal with. It seemed that they were the subordinates of this pirate? Maybe she had underestimated him too much. This group of people was settled near the south gate by Soren. At the same time, he secretly sent people to watch them to prevent these people from moving around in the camp at will. Gloria also quietly arranged a warning circle to block the area connected to the shadow plane. Now the portal had not been completely stabilized. If the portal was stabilized, the shadow cracks would be concentrated, and then other places in the camp would not be able to enter the shadow plane. The port was being developed, and when the time was right, they still had to be settled near the port. This may be an opportunity. Gloria waited until the Priest of Wealth and the others left, then immediately came to Soren and said, "The goodwill from the Temple of Wealth will make the Temple of Sea full of crisis. This can fight for more benefits for us." "I know." Soren nodded gently. But then he said in a deep voice, "But this matter must be considered carefully because if we are not careful, we may offend two churches at the same time." Gloria frowned, then raised her fingertips and gently drew a line on the planning and construction map. She separated an area from it and then slowly said, "Give up part of the benefits. Let them fight for it themselves." P.S. Today's first update, there will be more in the afternoon. Chapter 344. The arrival of the priest of the Lady of Riches made Soren a little more vigilant. That was, as his strength grew, he would inevitably attract the attention of many powerful veteran forces. This was something that could not be avoided. Perhaps when Soren was not strong enough, these forces would choose to ignore him. But when Soren broke through a certain threshold, they would inevitably come into contact with him. Fortunately, it was the priest of the Lady of Riches who came. If the Storm Temple secretly sent someone to contact him, things would be even more troublesome. This place was close to the rainforest of the Amazons. If he refused, he would be attacked. In the end, he was not strong enough. If Soren could ignore the influence of the Sea Temple, then he could confidently say, "This is my territory, I'm the boss." Advancing into the realm of legends, Soren felt that he had to speed up his progress. If there were 3 legendary figures in charge, no temple would dare to act rashly. So after settling down the priest of the Lady of Riches, Soren could take people to deal with the Quetzalcoatlus. Gloria was in the camp, and the wizard's eye was always monitoring the crack in the shadow plane. He was not worried that the other party would discover the secret here. So he took a group of people to hunt the Quetzalcoatlus early in the morning. As a dangerous dragon subspecies, they could bring Soren a lot of slaughter EXP, and he would definitely level up as a wizard. However, he still had to avoid casualties. It was not realistic for Soren to hunt these Quetzalcoatlus alone. The number of Quetzalcoatlus was probably more than one hand. The back of the mountain was a cliff. Soren had built a brick factory here, and the craftsmen from the east were busy. Behind the red land was a small river, and then it was the territory of the Quetzalcoatlus. There was feces of the Quetzalcoatlus here, so other creatures did not dare to come close. Soren's people were all grade 3 and above. Among them, there were elites who had participated in the White Dragon War. The dragon leather armor was in the process of being made. This process was not easy, and they might need the help of the drows. A group of people climbed up the mountain. Before they got close to the cliff, they heard the low roar of the Quetzalcoatlus. These dragon subspecies found them, but they did not attack. Instead, they roared at them and tried to drive them away. Swoosh! Soren shot an arrow at the wing of one of the Quetzalcoatlus. This provocation angered the beasts, and 2 of them roared and swooped down from the sky. Out of the way! Soren shouted, pulled out his curved sword Icing Death, leaped up and stabbed into the Quetzalcoatlus' abdomen. The force of the dive knocked Soren away, but this force also turned into an impact, allowing Soren to cut open the belly of the Quetzalcoatlus in front of him, directly opening a wound nearly 2 meters long. A large amount of blood and intestines spilled out. Finally, the Quetzalcoatlus hit the ground with a bang, and half of its dragon wings smashed into Soren's abdomen. Cough, cough. Soren coughed and spat out a mouthful of blood. He had suffered some bruises, but it was worth it. The Quetzalcoatlus in front of him was on the verge of death. Puchi. The scimitar cut through the head of the Quetzalcoatlus and beheaded it. A row of data appeared: activated sword form, beheading. You've dealt 72 damage to the target. Beheading successful. Target dead. You've gained 5600 slaughter EXP. Soren's battle was glorious, but the situation on his men's side was not very good. Although they hit the enemy with their javelins when they spread out, one of them was hit by the Quetzalcoatlus. Even the iron armor could not withstand the sharp claws of the Quetzalcoatlus. Their chest was almost pierced through, and even their ribs were lifted up. The large dragon subspecies attack was quite fierce, and with the advantage of their large size, their strength was enough to send a mammoth flying. One of Soren's men was killed by a diving attack, and the Quetzalcoatlus immediately wanted to fly into the air. Of course, Soren would not let it fly. He immediately picked up a javelin and threw it. The javelin whistled out and hit the enemy's wing, causing it to stagger and fall to the ground. Without a chance to fly into the air, the Quetzalcoatlus immediately swept its tail, then opened its mouth to bite the nearest person. Let me do it. Soren needed to gain slaughter EXP, so he naturally could not let his men kill it. He shouted, everyone spread out and attack with javelins. Brute force. Haste. Soren activated the permanent haste spell on his legendary boots, and his whole body turned into a shadow as he rushed towards the Quetzalcoatlus. Although equipment with permanent spells could be activated for a whole day, it was not so convenient in normal life, and sometimes it could not achieve the effect of a surprise attack. Most of these permanent spells were activated during battle. Some of them were directly tattooed on the body by special means or other methods, and they could only be activated in a special environment. For example, there was a permanent spell like Dragon Wing. If it was exposed at the beginning, it was likely to be counterproductive because fission could sometimes destroy these permanent spells. Clang. The curved sword turned into a cold light and slashed on the back of the Quetzalcoatlus. After the battle with the white dragon and the red dragon, Soren could deal with these dragon subspecies easily. Perhaps it was more dangerous to fight one against many, but it was very easy with the help of his men. Whoosh. With the light of the sword, the Quetzalcoatlus in front of them was quickly killed. Soren stood next to the body of the Quetzalcoatlus and took a breath, then said in a deep voice, "Let's go directly. Don't worry about these bodies, we'll come back and take them away." The rugged mountain road meandered up. Sometimes there was no road at all and they had to rely on the shuttle. They quickly climbed up the Quetzalcoatlus nest. Then they saw the 2 Quetzalcoatlus that were guarding the nest. The Quetzalcoatlus stayed in the nest and did not help their companions when they were attacked, nor did they run away when they encountered a powerful enemy. Then there was only one reason. Soren was a little stunned when he came up. Then he looked past the Quetzalcoatlus that were baring their fangs and brandishing their claws but did not attack. He saw several dragon eggs hidden behind them. Spring seemed to be the season for Quetzalcoatlus to lay their eggs. Then in summer and autumn the animals were fat and strong, so they could catch enough food to feed the hatched dragon eggs. Be careful. Soren looked at them seriously and then said, "All of you back away. Don't attack those dragon eggs. Maybe these dragon eggs are still useful." It was quite difficult to tame dragon subspecies. However, if they hatched from the eggs, the difficulty of taming them would be reduced a lot. The Quetzalcoatl's growth cycle was very fast. As long as there was enough food, they could grow to more than 1,000 pounds in half a year. Although Soren did not know how to tame a Quetzalcoatlus, the drows had the skill to tame a petrifying lizard. Giant lizards were very similar to dragon subspecies, which meant that the possibility of taming them was about 30%. A 30% chance was enough for Sauron to give it a try. The others immediately backed away when they heard Soren's words. Soren approached the two Quetzalcoatlus in front of him. They were very uneasy facing Soren, but they did not leave the nest. Whether it was a pure-blood dragon or a mixed-blood dragon subspecies, the probability of laying eggs was not very high. Therefore they would often protect their dragon eggs at all costs. Clang. A cold light flashed. Soren's figure strangely disappeared, and the next moment, he appeared behind the Quetzalcoatlus. However, he did not attack the enemy in front of him. Instead, he directly rushed to the dragon eggs and collected 5 of them in a dazzling speed. Soren turned around and stabbed his sword into the enemy's back. At the same time he shouted, "Kill them!" As long as they did not have to worry about breaking the dragon eggs, they could attack freely. These Quetzalcoatlus in front of them were no match for them. If Soren activated his slaughter transformation, it would not be difficult for him to fight these Quetzalcoatlus alone. P.S. That's all for today. She was not as relaxed as she was yesterday. He didn't know if it was because the little girl in the black princess dress gave her a lot of pressure today, or if it was because of some other reason. The little girl widened her eyes and looked around. Then she raised her little head and said, "Big brother, are these all dragon eggs?" Shit. When Vivian opened her mouth, Soren knew that this was bad. He knew that the little girl had always wanted to raise a majestic pet. Now that she had seen these dragon eggs, she might even want to raise one. Aya. The little girl skipped closer to the table and reached out her white little hand to touch the eggs. Then she cheered, "They really are dragon eggs. I've always wanted to raise one. Big brother, you're the best." What? Vivian stood on the chair, tiptoed, and kissed Soren on the cheek. Then she hugged the dragon egg and ran outside. She ran as fast as the wind. According to the little girl's judgment, there was a 90% chance that Soren would not agree to her raising such a dangerous creature. However, she had always wanted to raise a majestic pet. In the end, she decided to ignore everything and run away with the dragon egg after kissing her brother. When the baby dragon hatches in 2 days, her brother would probably not object. Wait. Vivian. Soren opened his mouth to say something but stopped. In the end, he sighed softly. He was indeed worried about letting the little girl raise a dragon, even if it was a subdragon species. Dragons had hereditary memories, and subdragon species were born with a wild nature. It was not as if they would treat whoever hatched them as their parents the moment they saw the egg. That was the plot in the bard's stories. In reality, the dragon egg would let the baby dragon attack as soon as it hatched. The dragon's hereditary memories would teach them their instincts. The real taming of dragons was done with spells and brainwashing. Soke. Gloria's figure appeared outside the door. She was wearing a long black dress, and her hair was casually tied up with a hairband. After entering the door, she glanced at Lulu, who was sneaking out. Then she said to Soren, "With Vivian's current strength, raising a subdragon shouldn't be dangerous. If it's a pure-blood dragon, it might be a little dangerous." She walked to the table, glanced at the remaining dragon eggs and said softly, "Are you planning to tame them?" Soren nodded slightly and said, "That's an idea." Gloria reached out and touched the dragon eggs, then frowned slightly and said, "This one has no breath of life. It's very difficult to tame dragon creatures. Only the people of Dragon City know the secret. Maybe it's easy to hatch them and control them, but it's quite difficult to make them listen to orders." Soren pressed his palm on the dragon egg that Gloria pointed out. Sure enough, he found that the breath of life was quite weak. There was no way to hatch this dragon egg. Even if it was a pure-blood dragon's egg, there would be some that could not hatch. Sometimes it was similar to eggs. When a nest of dragon eggs hatched, the proportion of baby dragons born in the end could only be regarded as average. Soren put the dragon egg aside and replied, "Let's try it first. The drows have the skill to tame petrified lizards. During this time they relied on me to provide them with materials, but only sent a team of drows to work. It's time for them to do something and at the same time, test the attitude of those female drows. If these female drows still don't understand the situation, they can't blame me for being merciless. Speaking of this, Soren's eyes flashed with a cold light. Gloria raised her hand and gently lifted her long hair, looking a little worried, and said, "The Drows are a race used to conspiracy and betrayal. I still can't trust them. You'd better be more careful." The underground creatures did not trust the surface creatures, and the surface creatures did not trust the underground creatures. Soren did not speak but nodded gently and said, "I know. They can't make any waves. If they do anything, I'll erase them immediately." Gloria gently nodded, then took out a scroll and handed it to Soren and said, "During this time Vivian and I have been studying how to arrange the teleportation circle to connect to the shadow plane and decipher the mystery of this magic scroll. The little girl's talent is really amazing. Even I am surprised by her learning speed. I'm afraid it won't be long before she can completely surpass me." The deciphering of Melf's minute meteors has been completed. This is a copy we made. The spell has been analyzed in words that you can understand. However, there is still a paragraph in the original version of the secret text that we haven't been able to decipher. It doesn't seem to be part of the spell, but more like an improved technique of an arcanist. For the time being, Vivian and I haven't been able to decipher it. It's a text created by an individual, so it will take a long time to fully understand it. Text. There were many languages in this world. When a wizard's strength reached a certain level, they also liked to create their own secret text. For example, if you drew a twisted wavy line, it would be a wavy line in the eyes of others, but in the text you created, it would mean something else. This kind of secret text created by a wizard was the most difficult to decipher. Unless the corresponding spell book was found, or some special ability was used to understand it. So even Gloria, who had a lot of knowledge, couldn't decipher it in a short time. Finally, the deciphering is complete. Soren reached out and took the scroll in front of him, then nodded and said, "Very good. I'll memorize it as soon as possible." Gloria's arrival was a great help. Vivian spent more than a month to decipher the spell, Melf's minute meteors, but not long after she came she had completed most of the analysis. Soren was quite looking forward to this spell. "Okay." Gloria smiled and looked at Soren, then turned and left the hall. Night fell. Soren went back to his room after making some arrangements for the night watch. He carefully spread out the magic scroll in front of him, then picked up a quill and copied on the snow-white paper. The white paper was filled with dense symbols, and he finished writing a stack of white paper. Only then did he rub his forehead and sigh. Why is it so hard? Soren felt a little dizzy. He got up and opened the window to get some fresh air, then sat back down. The difficulty was too high. Although this was only a level 3 spell, Soren felt that it was harder to master than a level 5 spell. He studied for half a day, but he couldn't even complete the prototype of the spell model. At this rate, it would take at least half a month to memorize it. It seemed that there were very few spells that were so difficult for him to learn since he became a wizard. The night passed quickly. Soren almost didn't sleep all night. He only put down the quill and rested for a while when it was close to dawn the next day. The progress of the spell model analysis was less than 3%. There was a pile of paper on the table that was nearly 10 centimeters thick with all kinds of symbols and words. Soren rubbed his forehead to relax his nerves, then he began to memorize the spells that he had mastered in the past. The sky was just beginning to brighten. Soren got up and left the room to practice the spells. When he had just finished using all the level 1 spells, the long-awaited prompt finally appeared. Ability improved. After a long period of practice, you have obtained some information about the ability, skillful spell casting. You have mastered the ability, skillful spell casting. Chapter 346. Finally he got it. When the data prompt for mastering abilities appeared in front of him, Soren actually had an illusion of sighing in his heart. It was much harder to master a spellcaster's ability compared to other abilities. A lot of melee abilities could be mastered in a year and a half, but even the simplest spellcasting ability would take a lot of time. From the moment Soren started to become a wizard, spellcasting proficiency had been accumulating experience points, but it was only now that he truly mastered it. Even with encyclopedic knowledge and sage, it still took him a long time to master it. Spellcasting proficiency, spellcasting ability. As you cast spells again and again, your mastery of spells will gradually increase. This will increase your mastery of any spell. When you cast any spell, you can reduce the casting time by 1. If you cast a spell that only takes a second to cast, then you can turn it into an instant cast spell. This spellcasting time reduction effect can be stacked with spellcasting speed enhancement effect from other equipment. Arcane Missile. Soren gently raised his finger. Without chanting any spell as if he was very familiar with it, he completed the spell casting naturally. Then, a series of arcane missiles shot out and completely penetrated the target in front of him. Spell casting proficiency was the core ability of a wizard. Many of the metamagic abilities that he would master in the future were accumulated from this. Since he had already mastered spellcasting proficiency, Soren did not need to continue saving slaughter EXP. A row of data appeared in front of him. Wizard profession has leveled up to level 10. Received 27 INT 21 plus INT 21 to 10, asterisk 0. 5. Skill points, HP increased by 10, profession HP 4 plus, con 22 to 10, asterisk 0. 5. Received 1 free attribute point. Received 1 ability point. Soren allocated the skill points to literacy and focus. He still could not master spellcasting in battle quickly because he did not have enough focus. It was easy to be interrupted in battle. The focus ability of a wizard had a wide range of uses. Whether it was learning spellcasting or spellcasting in battle, it had to pass a focus test. Pure wizards usually had a higher focus level. The ability that tested one's focus the most was mobile spellcasting. When casting spells while moving, one's focus would always be judged. Soren allocated his free attribute points to intelligence. In the future, when he wanted to learn legendary spells, the higher the intelligence the better. Then, there was the very important specialization. Spell maximization, metamagic specialty. This metamagic specialty can maximize the power of spells. At the cost of increasing 2 spell levels, the damage of a spell is increased by 100%. For example, a level 1 spell, Arcane Missile, would become a level 3 spell after using the metamagic ability to enhance spells. At the same time, the damage of Arcane Missile would be increased by 100%. Note, prerequisite to enhance spells. Silent Spellcasting, metamagic ability. This metamagic ability can silently cast a spell at the cost of increasing the spell's level. This allows a spell to be cast silently without any casting action or incantation. Silent spell casting ignored all silent spells, and it was difficult for the enemy to discover that a wizard was casting spells. Silent spell cast can be disguised under any movement until the moment the spell is cast. Only then can the enemy detect it. Note, Epic Talent, Silent Spell Casts Prerequisite. Instant Cast Spell, Metamagic Specialty. This metamagic specialty can instantly cast a spell at the cost of increasing the spell's level by 3 to make it an instant cast spell. Instant spell casting could not be interrupted by any conventional means, and it was immune to all silent spells and counterspells. Note, prerequisite to epic spell casting. Soren looked at the 3 options in front of him and couldn't help but fall into deep thought. Among them, spell maximization belonged to the damage category. It could greatly increase the power of spells. If he wanted to go all the way down the path of Arcane Missile, then this ability was quite useful. Then there was Silent Spell Casting. This was a very effective ability to sneak up on the enemy. During the Astral War, Her Excellency the Eye of the North used Silent Spell Casting. During the whole process, no one noticed that she was preparing a legendary spell. It was only when the legendary spell was completed that others realized it. This ability was very popular among arcane tricksters in the past because it could surprise the enemy. Finally, there was instant spell casting, which everyone was very familiar with. It could directly turn a spell into an instant spell at the cost of increasing 3 spell levels. This was a very useful but costly metamagic ability. Whether it was silent spell casting or instant spell casting, they were all prerequisites for future epic abilities. After mastering this metamagic ability, a legendary wizard could successively master instant spell casting, silent spell casting, level 0 instant spell casting, silent spell casting, level 1 instant spell casting, silent spell casting, level 2 and so on. As long as this epic ability was mastered, there was no need to increase the spell level of the corresponding level. For example, if one mastered the epic ability instant spell casting, level 1, then all the level 1 spells would automatically become instant spell casting. There was no need to use additional level 4 spell slots to memorize them. This epic ability could be upgraded all the way to level 9. When one mastered the epic ability instant spell casting, level 9, all level 9 spells would become instant spell casting. There was no need to use additional spell slots to memorize them. That was why many wizards mastered the instant spell casting in advance. This was to save ability points and upgrade all the epic ability instant spell casting after entering the realm of legends. Unfortunately, Soren had never seen anyone succeed. It could be said that the most powerful spellcaster he had ever seen was Arendel's Princess Royal. However, even she didn't master the epic ability instant spell casting, level 9. At most, she could only instant spell casting, level 6. This was a choice. It determined whether a spellcaster wanted to be the most powerful one, or give up on pursuing the path of being the most powerful and to master other easier and more practical abilities, such as spell casting, silent spell casting, spell delay and so on. The Eye of the North chose to cast a silent spell. This meant that it was almost impossible for her to touch the path of being the most powerful wizard. She could only go further and further on the path of silent spell casting. Silent spell casting. Anne Arendel's Princess Royal and now Vivian, both walked the path of being the most powerful wizard. Soren could be sure of one thing. Vivian definitely mastered instant spell casting. Otherwise her casting speed wouldn't be so fast. Many low-level spells didn't even need to be chanted. However, now that it was his turn to choose, Soren didn't know which path he should choose. If he chose spell maximization, he would pursue the most powerful spell damage. In the future, when combined with epic spell penetration, he would be able to explode with amazing destructive power. However, if he chose instant spell casting, he might be able to touch the path of being the most powerful wizard in the future. This was a difficult choice. Chapter 347. Soren fell into deep thought. Unknowingly, he had returned to his room. When he saw the scroll of the level 3 spell, Melf's Minute Meteor, on the table, he seemed to have remembered something and made a decision. The instant casting of spells was basically done after the legendary level. The most important thing for him now was his current combat power. It was too difficult to hold on to the ability to cast instant spells all the way to the legendary level. He might even have the ability to become a god by then. If he could become a god, it was not impossible to replace the ability to cast instant legendary spells in the future. The realm of the gods was full of mystery. So Soren quickly made a decision and silently said, "I choose the meta-magic ability, spell maximization." Once the ability was chosen, Soren's thoughts were completely opened. He quickly had new ideas about the total number of spells he had mastered, the combat application of various spells, and the types of spells to memorize. First, the level 1 spells. Defensive spells were not very useful for Soren, who had amazing dexterity and strong constitution. It could be said that most of the level 1 spells were not as good as him drawing his sword and slashing it twice. Therefore, all the level 1 spell slots were used to memorize Arcane Missile. Soren currently had 6 level 1 spells. If he memorized all of them, he could rely on the ability, Spellcasting Proficiency, to instantly cast 30 missile attacks, which was equivalent to a level 6 spell, Missile Storm. Note, Arcane Missile limit is 5, Lesser Missile Storm limit is 15, casting time is 2 seconds, Advanced Missile Storm limit is 30, casting time is 3 seconds. In addition to the Transformation Combat Wizard, there were also the Cold Wizard, the Death Immunity Wizard, the Missile Burst Wizard, and the Bigby's 5 Consecutive Palms Wizard. The most powerful ones should be the Transformation Wizard and the Bigby's 5 Consecutive Palms Wizard. These two wizard systems were born before the Arcane Empire. Currently, there were very few people who could master these two sets of combat spells. Note, Bigby, one of the most famous combat wizards in history. The inventor of Bigby's Protective Palm, level 5, Bigby's Flying Palm, level 6, Bigby's Grappling Palm, level 7, Bigby's Diamond Palm, level 8, and Bigby's Crushing Palm, level 9. These 5 spells are the legendary Bigby's 5 Consecutive Palms, a set of combat spells enough to kill a legendary warrior in a head-on fight. There were 2 sets of spells that could challenge the gods. The first was the Melf's Minute Meteor that Soren discovered, and the second was the Bigby's 5 Consecutive Palms. Bigby's 5 Consecutive Palms. Among them, Melf's Minute Meteors had an even lower casting requirement. Once the idea was opened, the ideas were much easier. Soren was not lacking in survivability, so there was no need for him to memorize a large number of defensive spells like other wizards. Therefore, the spell slots he had were used for support and burst attacks. The level 2 spells were Brute Force and Cat's Grace. The remaining 3 spell slots were all used to memorize Arcane Missile, Empower Spell. Level 3 spells to be. However, Soren chose to give up on memorizing most of the spells. He only kept Fly, and then used all the other spell slots to memorize Arcane Missile, Maximum Spell. In this way, his BIU Arcane Missile Storm had been formed. From level 1 to level 3, he had memorized a total of 12 arcane missiles. With such a missile storm attack, it was not difficult to drown the enemy in an instant. Starting from level 4 spells, Soren's spell memory was a lot more cautious. This was because it was the key to the battle and also an important ability buff. He chose Brute Force, Extreme Spell, Cat's Grace, Extreme Spell, and Greater Invisibility. As a professional level 10 wizard, Soren had the last 2 level 5 spell slots. However, he did not want to memorize other spells because he was going to use them to memorize his trump card. That was Melf's Minute Meteor. This was a level 3 spell. With the help of the meta-magic ability, Extreme Spell, it required level 5 spell slots to be memorized. Since it was to maximize the lethality, he naturally could not use level 3 spell slots to memorize it. For the first time, Soren had a fairly clear position on the choice of spell memory. As a top rogue, he was still a novice in the field of wizards. Until the spells and abilities he had mastered gradually took shape, his mind began to gradually become clear. Although he had 22 points of intelligence and a level 10 wizard, Soren could only use about 20 spell slots. The lack of spell slots made him unable to cast spells calmly like other wizards. He could only turn the core of the battle into an instant burst, as much as possible to match his rogue's fighting style. The spell was formed. Soren became clearer about his position. He looked at his remaining 80,000 slaughter EXP and chose to memorize most of the core spells in his mind. In this way he avoided the trouble of needing a spell book to memorize them. Professional level 10 was a watershed. From here on, the slaughter EXP needed to level up to more than 100,000. Especially spellcasting professions, it would increase by more than 20% compared to other melee professions. In a short time, Soren probably did not have much slaughter EXP to allocate to his wizard profession level. Instead, he was preparing to focus on the legendary rogue skill, Shadow Realm. The morning passed quickly. After Soren sorted out his thoughts, he opened the attribute page. Now he was no longer a thief on the streets of Amber City. Even compared to the past, he had many advantages in many aspects. For example, abilities. Now his attributes had become: Name, Soren. Race, Half-Elf, Son of Slaughter. Attributes: Strength 19 plus 7, Giant Strength plus 6, Agility 26 plus 2, Constitution 22 plus 1, Intelligence 22 plus 2, Wisdom 16 plus 1, Charm 19 plus 3, Mo's Sorrow plus 2. Alignment: Lawful Evil. Profession: Level 10 Commoner, Level 7 Rogue 0126500, Level 5 Shadow Dancer 018500, Level 10 Wizard 014850, Grade 4. Health points: 292292, Sturdy. EXP: 72075, Slaughter EXP: 1545, Professional EXP, unassigned. Skill points: none. Attribute points: none. Legend level: 27. Divinity: 12, Minor Divinity. Requires 30 points to upgrade, Minor Divinity. Status: normal. Basic skills: Sneak 225, Literacy 275, Steal 75, Pick Lock 80, Snare 75, Focus 65, Negotiation 75, Appraise 45, Deception 40, Intimidation 75, Taunt 20, Act 25, Listen 45, Evasion 120, Parry 55, Block 30, Heal 65, Search 45, Detect 50, Scroll Copy 45, Spellcraft 35, Survival 45, Use Magic Device 35, Cooking 35, Alchemy 25. Legendary skills: Omnipotent Hands, Epic Dexterity. Special abilities: Blessing of the Misfortune Goddess, Blessing of the Sea Goddess, Dragon Blood Baptism LV2, Killing Heart, Slayer, Ascetic, Scholar. Personal abilities: Nimble Left Hand, Eidetic Memory, Perseverance, Encyclopedic Knowledge, Spellcasting Proficiency, Reflex Evasion, Evasion Intuition, Roll Evasion, Nimble Movement, Evade Sight, Dark Vision, Spell Control, Empower Spell, Maximize Spell, Minor Spell Resistance, Minor Cold Resistance, Minor Fire Resistance, Minor Poison Resistance, Minor Electric Resistance, Greater Dual Wielding, Sturdy, Regeneration, Intermediate, Telepathy 10 feet. Profession abilities: Shadow Weave, Military Weapon, Proficiency, Curved Sword, Legendary. Combat skills: Summon Shadow, Shadow Leap, Shadow Strike, Shadow Jump, Fear Gaze, Divine, Fear, Divine, Vampiric Touch, Divine, Counterspell, sword form, heavy hack. Sword form, horizontal slash. Sword form, behead. Sword form, spinning strike. Attributes, skills, and abilities. A powerful professionist was built up from these three elements. Now Soren had basically surpassed other professions of the same level in these three elements. The only obvious shortcoming was that his taunt skill was only 20 points. There was no other way. Soren's fighting style had always been to get rid of the enemy quickly. There was basically no chance to taunt the enemy, so his taunt skill was the one that grew the slowest. Perhaps it was because he had more contact with women, his acting ability had improved, but his taunt skill had not increased much. Time passed day by day. Soren devoted most of his energy to the process of analyzing Melf's Minute Meteor, but he was still busy with the layout of the camp. At the same time, some information from the outside world was sent over from Port Tylon. War broke out. There were local conflicts between the orcs in the north and the southern kingdom, and the small-scale war made the situation even more confusing. The rebels on the south coast counterattacked the city, and the decaying kingdom announced that they were bewitched by the evil devil. At the same time, they urgently called on the nobles in the kingdom to wipe out the rebels. Unfortunately, there were very few people who responded. It seemed that in this period of chaos, many people had felt the premonition of the coming turmoil. The old aristocratic forces wanted to preserve their strength, and not many people were willing to expend too much energy at this time, especially when the main force of the rebels had not been hit hard. There were only various rumors about the devil hiding behind the scenes, but no one could be sure of his identity. South gate of the camp. A sneaky figure came from the side, then climbed into a room through the window. Sir Priest. The thin figure took off his cloak, then bowed slightly and said, "I didn't find anything. The guards at the warehouse are too strict, and there are magic traps set up by the witch. I dare not rashly go over and alarm them." There were many rogues among the believers of the Lady of Riches. He was one of them disguised as a follower, and he had been secretly trying to spy here since he arrived at the camp. Yes. Kim was wearing a priest's robe inlaid with pearls and gems. She nodded slightly and said, "It's never wrong to be careful. Although he is friendly to us, it's best not to provoke him." "Is there any news from the temple?" Standing behind her was a middle-aged man who looked like an ordinary follower, but in fact he was a grade 3 wizard. The followers of the Lady of Riches were very wide, and there were naturally many wizards who gave their faith to money. He immediately replied, "There is no clear news yet, but the church is secretly sending people to negotiate with the Sea Temple." Level 5 spell message spell. After listening to his words, Kim pondered for a moment, then said, "Let them speed up. The decline of the City of Riches may make the goddess dissatisfied with us. If we can open up the route here, the prosperous trade can enhance the goddess' power and influence." "Yes." The middle-aged man nodded. At this time, sitting in the corner, a young woman who looked like a woman, but not a professional, more like a merchant, said, "Kim, is it necessary to be so anxious? I don't think this throat cutter has much business sense at all. These days I often go out and walk around and find that he has invested most of his manpower and material resources into that broken land. These newly cultivated lands are basically of little value. Even if the weather is good for a year, they can't make much money. It's estimated that it's not as good as the wealth of a ship's round-trip trade. With this time, energy, manpower, and material resources, if all of them are invested in the construction of the port, I'm afraid that the wealth earned in 1 year is comparable to the income of 20 years of farming. In the end, he is just a short-sighted country tycoon who only knows how to guard that land." Kim turned and glanced at her. It seemed that the young woman's status was quite high, so her attitude and tone were softer. She slowly shook her head and said, "Maybe it's not that simple. A pirate king who can rise in such a short time is definitely not a simple character. Maybe he's plotting something bigger." Plotting something bigger? The others couldn't help but fall into deep thought. What was the bigger scheme behind this? Only then would they value the land more than the wealth at their fingertips? When the young woman heard this, she seemed to be deep in thought. Her eyes couldn't help but light up slightly. Sea Temple. Accompanied by the sound of something being smashed, the angry roar of the Naga Siren priest came from the hall. "How dare you? This ingrate that can't be fed. I don't even know when he got involved with the Church of Riches." The Naga Siren priest had an angry expression on her face, and she took a deep breath to calm down. A strange voice came from the side, which seemed to be coming from the sea under the temple. It said faintly, "Your Excellency, what should we do now?" The Naga Siren priest closed her eyes and pondered for a moment. Then she opened her eyes and said, "This guy is getting harder and harder to control. No. We must send people to build the temple. He has developed a little in the outer islands. It's time to establish the faith of the sea goddess there." The strange voice continued to come from under the sea. "What about the Church of Riches? These guys are not easy to deal with." "Agree to their request." The Naga Siren priest smirked and said slowly, "But they have to pay the price. Since they want to intervene in the outer islands, they must give up part of their own interests. Tell them that we must be allowed to spread our faith among the fishermen in the coastal areas before we agree to expand their trade in the outer islands." Faith exchange. This was the plan of the Naga Siren priest. It had always been difficult for the Sea Temple to find a breakthrough in the inland areas. They had been trapped near Port Tylon for nearly 100 years. Now the request of the Church of Riches was also an opportunity for her to spread her faith to the coastal areas. She did not dare to put forward conditions that were too excessive. She only targeted the fishermen who were likely to become believers of the sea goddess. As for whether they would further expand the scope and influence of the sea goddess after establishing a foundation along the coast, that was something to be discussed in the future. The rich catch could easily open a breakthrough for them. As long as the Church of Riches gave them a little authority, they could take root among the humans. As for who would gain more and have more influence in the end, it would depend on the strength of each other's churches. The Naga Siren priest was very confident about this because as long as the sea route was cut off, the situation of the Church of Riches would be quite passive. Thinking of this, the corners of her mouth could not help but reveal a trace of a sinister smile. In the gloomy valley, the strong smell of blood almost enveloped the land. There were dead vampire bats everywhere, as well as those ferocious vampire servants. In the center were the bodies of the dark guards. As powerful fallen advanced professions, they finally died under the siege of the dense vampire bats. How is it possible? The black-robed priest was covered in blood from head to toe. Under his tattered black robe, his full body armor was exposed. He held a heavy warhammer in one hand and a shining shield in the other. His expression was a little blank as he murmured, "How could I have failed?" There were only 5 followers left near him. In the end, all the survivors were priests, high-grade priests who could wear full body armor and a shield. At the same time, it did not affect their spellcasting ability. In such a fierce battle, priests were always the kind of people who could stand firm to the end. Patter. The figure of the demigod vampire fell from mid-air. There were quite serious burn marks on his chest, but the flesh and blood there were rapidly regenerating. At this moment, he did not have the elegant and calm expression at the beginning because half of his head seemed to be severely burned. Many high-grade dark guards fell nearby, and there were only a few surviving vampire servants. Relying on a group of cannon fodder to deal with the dark guards, the price paid was naturally quite heavy. "It's over." The demigod vampire showed a proud smile on his face and said slowly, "The elites of the Church of Fear were all buried here by you. Even if you go back alive, the High Priest will not let you go. Have you thought about it? Choose to serve me, or choose to die. Now that you no longer have the ability to stop me, why are you obsessed with believing in a god who is about to fall? Be loyal to me. You are the next chief priest. What he can give you, I can also give you." Clang. The sound of a weapon falling to the ground. The black-robed priest in front of him seemed to have given up resistance and slowly knelt on the ground. Ah! The demigod vampire showed a satisfied smile and couldn't help but burst into laughter. After defeating the elites of the Church of Fear, they no longer had the ability to stop him from stealing the divine power of fear. When the divine power of fear accumulated to a certain extent, then he would be qualified to touch the divine power of fear. In a dark corner in the valley, the Helpheimer took back the magic flute in his palm. He was surrounded by corpses that died in various ways, but one thing in common was that their expressions when they died were very peaceful. He silently looked at the demigod vampire in front of him, and his eyes seemed to shine with a strange light. Chapter 348. The night passed quickly. Soren got up early the next day because the third batch of supplies from Snake Island had arrived. Snake Island was the transit station of the overseas base. There was a killer whale that was about to mutate into a sea monster. It was a very safe place. Now the killer whale was almost the size of a blue whale. Basically, a slightly smaller ship could not even withstand a hit from it. The sea near Snake Island had been divided into a restricted area by Soren. He was afraid of being attacked by the pirate King Ashrod. As long as it was not Soren's ship near that area, it was likely to be attacked by this mutant killer whale. About half a month ago there were merchant ships from the shipwrecked sea. No one knew if it was a real merchant ship or a spy of the pirate King Ashrod. Anyway, it was directly hit and sunk by the mutant killer whale. No one was left alive on the ship. Since then the others had learned a lot. It took a bloody massacre to make them understand that Soren's words were not a joke. Snake Island stored a large number of supplies, many of which were directly supplied to the overseas base. This could reduce the travel time. It was also easier to avoid other people's eyes and ears. After all, there were too many forces in Port Tylon. Not far from the camp, the leader of the Drow warriors, Dark Blade Andri, was waiting in front. "Your Excellency, Throat Cutter." When he saw Soren approaching, he quickly bowed his head slightly and then said, "I have sent those dragon eggs to the priest. There should be no problem with hatching, but it's hard to say whether it can be tamed successfully. Because we have been away from the Underdark for too long, there are very few people in the tribe who know how to tame petrifying lizards. But we will do our best." Hearing this, Sauron looked at him with a rather cold attitude and then said, "Yes, I know." After that, he left directly. Only the Drow warrior leader was left standing in place. Dark Blade Andri looked a little nervous. After hesitating for a moment, he did not immediately follow. Instead, he waved his hand and called a Drow ranger. He frowned and said, "He is already a little impatient with us. Those damn women haven't come to a conclusion yet? At least they should say something, right? I'm worried that the Throat Cutter will become more and more dissatisfied with us." The young Drow ranger was also nervous and whispered, "Recently many important positions in the defense have been taken over by those pirates. We basically can't do anything about the warehouse. Those pirates obviously want to prove that they are not inferior to us. I'm afraid that if this continues we will be replaced. Besides, those pirates are humans and we are all Drows. I'm also worried that if this goes on, Cutthroat will." At this point the young Drow ranger paused. The two of them looked at each other and couldn't help but shake their heads. Dark Blade frowned and pondered for a moment. Suddenly he gritted his teeth and said, "These damned females are really stubborn. We're obviously living under their roof but they're still behaving like slaves." The Drow ranger also showed a thoughtful expression on his face. He suddenly lowered his voice and said, "Master Dark Blade, the Drow warriors are very supportive of you. Moreover, your reputation is not inferior to any of the priests, but because they are females their status has always been higher than yours. I think that since we have gradually integrated into the surface world, maybe some customs should be given up. As males in the group, we bear more responsibilities, but we don't have the corresponding status. It's time to make some changes. If Master Dark Blade is willing to stand up, I believe that many Drow warriors and rangers are willing to support you." Silence. Dark Blade fell into silence when he heard the words, but there was a flash of light in his eyes, which seemed to be a little scorching. Inside the Drows, the status of male Drows was quite low, and they basically did not have much power. Even in the belief of the Dark Maiden, the female Drows still firmly occupied a dominant position. After thousands of years of inheritance and accumulation, the male Drows were not without complaints. It was just that the customs of the group had been deeply rooted, and the rule of the female Drows was still unshakable. But now that they had come to the surface world, maybe they had a chance to make some changes? In the Underdark, if a male Drow of any family ascended to the position, he might be ridiculed by other Drow families. He might even be regarded as challenging the dominance of the female Drows, so he would be punished by the Queen of Spiders or even besieged by other Drow families. But this was the surface world and no one would attack them because of this. A cold light appeared in Dark Blade's eyes. He slowly clenched the hilt of his sword and said in a deep voice, "Give them another chance. They don't know the strength of the Throat Cutter, but we can't let our people be dragged into the abyss of eternal damnation." Soren's means were too ruthless. All along he had given people the impression that he was decisive. Dark Blade was worried that something terrible would happen when His Excellency Throat Cutter ran out of patience. The port. As soon as Soren arrived at the port, he saw the priest of the goddess of riches in front of him. Gold was still dressed in jewelry, like a graceful and luxurious lady, but unfortunately she looked a little bit vulgar. If there was a word to describe the love of the believers of the goddess of riches, then Tycoon Gold was definitely their favorite color. "Your Excellency." Cyclops had been waiting for a long time. When he saw Soren, he immediately handed over a list and said, "This is the goods that were sent here. Then here is the news sent by the Sea Temple." Soren reached out and took a look. He immediately said, "The supplies allocated to the drows will be reduced by half, and the rest will be allocated as rewards for the Eastern craftsmen." After that, he opened the letter sent by the Sea Temple. After a few glances, Soren couldn't help but frown, and then silently put it away. "Your Excellency." Gold came over with a smile on her face. She played with the agate ring on her index finger and slowly said, "It seems that we can sign the agreement? We have taken a fancy to the land from the slope in front to the land here. We are willing to buy it at a price that will definitely satisfy your Excellency. At the same time, if you have no problems, the City of Wealth will soon send people to support your Excellency in the construction of the port." What a big appetite. Soren glanced at the place she pointed and found that the location Gold picked was quite tricky. She marked out nearly 1,000 acres of land in one breath. From the port to the border there, almost 1/3 of the most useful land was taken away by her. And her pointing was equivalent to including 1/3 of the port, which made Soren a little hesitant. "Your Excellency, don't rush to refuse." Gold had been secretly observing the changes in Soren's expression. After noticing that Soren seemed to disagree, she immediately said, "The fleet of the City of Wealth has set off yesterday. Maybe after you see our strength there will be new changes immediately. Money has the most powerful magic. I believe we will not let your Excellency down." Speaking of this, she couldn't help but show a confident and playful smile at the corner of her mouth. Soren was silent for a moment when he heard this, and then put away the letter directly. The priest of the Goddess of Wealth in front of him was more well-informed than him. The fleet of the City of Wealth had set off yesterday. What she said was already equivalent to showing her strength. The foundation of a god's church that had stood for thousands of years was indeed far beyond his, a pirate king who had just established his foundation. Camp Warehouse. Soren had just returned here, and the half-elf first mate was already waiting. "Your Excellency." The half-elf first mate bowed slightly after seeing him, and then handed over a well-made leather armor and said in a rather excited tone, "We have asked the craftsmen to make more than a dozen dragon leather armors. This is one that was just made today. I have tested it briefly, and its protective ability is not worse than inlaid iron armor. At the same time, it is much lighter to wear. Please take a look, Your Excellency." "Completed?" Soren heard the words and showed a smile on his face. He reached out and glanced at it, then waited and was quite satisfied. "Not bad. But this seems to be dragon leather armor made of Quetzalcoatlus. What about the other part?" The half-elf first mate heard the words and quietly approached a little and whispered, "The other part is more difficult to make. It may take a while, but the quality should be better than this batch." Soren nodded and said, "Let them finish as soon as possible. After a while we may have to clean up the nearby aborigines." The half-elf first mate showed a bloodthirsty smile on his face and nodded heavily, "Your Excellency, don't worry. The task will be completed within this month." Item type, dragon leather armor, +1, item grade, rare, grade 1. Item description, this is a leather armor made of Quetzalcoatlus's dragon skin. Compared to other armors, it is stronger and lighter, and has quite good protective ability. Some of the characteristics of dragon subspecies dragon skin are retained in the leather armor, so it has good durability against fire, ice, and acid. It will not be easily damaged by the enemy's attack. In terms of craftsmanship, this dragon leather armor is a little rough, and it did not reach the best effect, but it still has the potential to be enchanted. Requirements, 8 points of strength. Because it is dragon leather, it is heavier than other leather armors. Equipment effect, dragon subspecies dragon skin, tough, defense level +5. Weapon special effect, dragon subspecies dragon skin. This dragon leather armor has the defensive ability of dragon subspecies. It can directly resist any attack below 5 points of attack. When receiving most attacks, it can reduce the damage received. Weapon special effect, tough. This dragon leather armor is quite tough, so it is not easy to damage it when receiving attacks. Strong acid and fire also can easily damage it. Dragon leather is really different. Soren held the +1 dragon leather armor in his hand and nodded with satisfaction. This defensive ability was not weaker than the inlaid steel armor. If he used it to store his subordinates, their battle strength would definitely increase by a lot. Unfortunately, Soren could not wear armor. This was because wizards had a higher chance of failure when casting a spell to pierce through armor, especially those heavy full-body armors. The failure rate of casting a spell could increase to more than 50%. The only advanced class that could cast spells while wearing armor was the Arcane Knight. They had a unique ability called casting while wearing armor. Arcane Knight, Advanced Class. Has the abilities Alertness, Iron Will, Advanced Skill, Combat Casting, Ability, Focus. Can cast spells while wearing any armor. Remark. One of the Advanced Heroic Advanced Classes, a class that specializes in both magic and martial arts. It was basically impossible for Soren to wear armor. There were too few Arcane Knights, so it was very difficult for him to learn the ability, casting while wearing armor, from them. Therefore he could only think of ways to get a legendary enchanted robe. The legendary robe also had a strong defensive ability. It could even be directly enchanted with an energy shield without affecting the user's agility. A busy day had passed. In the evening, Soren took a stroll around the camp after dealing with many things. He also wanted to take a look at the wizard Saruman's research progress. The reclamation of the land was almost complete, and it would not be long before the seeds were sown. The fertilizers had to keep up with the progress, or the harvest this year would definitely not be enough. There were no weeds around the camp now, and the neat roads could be considered to be connected in all directions. The wizard Saruman's laboratory was in the northern corner. He seemed to like studying the plants in the tropical forest. Soren soon arrived at an independent courtyard. There were specially set up spell traps nearby. Relying on his thief's intuition, Soren easily found them. At the same time, the alarm traps set up by Saruman also noticed Soren's arrival. "Welcome, sir." The door to the courtyard opened automatically. There was a simple alchemy circle, and then Saruman's voice sounded from it. "I'm almost done with the things you need. I'm in the middle of an experiment, so I can't leave for the time being. You can come in directly." Soren glanced around and then entered the courtyard. As soon as he entered, he saw some strange plants. They looked a bit like nepenthes, and there were many other plants that were not easy to identify. These plants were planted around the courtyard, and there was a special fence around them. There was a sign in front of each plant, recording the time it was planted and so on. "This is?" Soren frowned slightly and muttered, "Man-eating flowers? Did he plant these plants? It should be those strange plants. Although the size was different, and they lacked the aura of a living creature, it should be the man-eating plants in the forest. The difference was, the ones in the forest were like living creatures, but the ones in front of him were a bunch of plants." "Sir." Saruman walked out of the room, bowed slightly and made an inviting gesture, and then said, "I've already completed the first step of the things you need." He saw Soren observing the plants, and his expression changed slightly. He then pretended to be relaxed and said, "These man-eating plants are very interesting, I'm studying them." "All right. These plants are the fertilizer you need, and you can see that they're growing very quickly." Soren was very sensitive to Saruman's unnatural behavior, but he didn't ask too much. After all, they were only in an employer-employee relationship. Wizards had a very special hobby. As long as it wasn't something dangerous, Soren would tolerate it. He had dealt with necromancy wizards before. Compared to those wizards who studied corpses all day long, Saruman's hobby was nothing. So he got up and entered the room and immediately saw a lot of bottles and jars and many glass test tubes. For a moment, it made him feel like he had entered a chemistry laboratory. Alchemy. A field that included potions, enchantments, engineering, magic runes, and so on. Even the creation of souls was within the scope of alchemy. It was a very profound field of research. In the laboratory there were 3 apprentices busy, and next to them was a clumsy clay golem. This clay golem looked very stiff, as if it didn't have a soul, and just stood there holding a strange instrument. "Sir, please take a look." Saruman took out a box, and inside it was something the size of a grain. It smelled like urea. He reached out and touched his beard, smiled and said, "This is what you want. I've already tested it and it's very effective on any plant." Soren picked one up and observed it. This was a little different from the fertilizer he remembered, but it wasn't too far off. Using guano stones to turn into fertilizer wasn't a very high-end process. He gently put it back and said, "How's the production?" Saruman's face was a little embarrassed and his voice was a little lower as he said, "The daily production is about this much." Soren couldn't help but frown and said, "No. It's too little. How much could there be in this box?" The amount of land he needed to cultivate was quite large, and there were nearly 1,000 slaves in charge of farming the land. This amount of production was simply not enough to meet the needs of farming. "I know." Saruman hurriedly said, "I'm trying to find a way to modify the alchemy tools. If I succeed, the production will increase a lot." "Okay." Soren nodded, patted him on the shoulder and said, Increase the production as soon as possible. My request is not only to meet the needs of farming here, but also to make it into a commodity. I think you should understand. Saruman nodded seriously and promised, at the end of the month the production will meet your requirements. P.S. The camp has developed to the point where it is close to a town, so it needs a name. Fu Tu couldn't think of a suitable name, so he could only ask for the name of a city. If anyone thinks of it, you can leave a message in the book review section. Chapter 349. After getting Saruman's promise, Soren felt a lot more relieved. Since he promised to complete the task at the end of the month, he would wait for a while. Before leaving, Soren couldn't help but glance at the man-eating plants again. He didn't know if it was his illusion, but he actually found that the plants moved strangely. These mutant plants were a bit special. He hoped that Saruman's research on them would not cause any trouble. It was almost evening. Soren walked around the camp, then he was ready to go back and continue to study Melf's Minute Meteors. This low-level god-slaying spell was really not a joke. Soren had been analyzing the spell model for so many days, but he still hadn't made much progress. In the structure of the spell model of Melf's Minute Meteors, there were many quite complicated spell nodes and spell circuits. If the spell model was compared to a circuit board, then the other level 3 spells were at the level of a calculator, and Melf's Minute Meteors was at the level of a computer. This required quite an amazing memory and analytical ability. According to Soren's estimation, the difficulty of mastering it was almost higher than level 6 spells. The sea breeze blew from the side. Soren walked along the road and then came to the west gate. As soon as he arrived here, he saw the patrolling guards a little panicked, but it didn't seem to be a big deal. Your Excellency. When the guard captain in charge of training saw Soren, he immediately trotted over and said, Miss is leading a dragon for a walk over there. A dragon? Soren was startled when he heard the words, then he hurried over there. As soon as he walked around the gate, Soren saw Vivian in front of him, wearing a black princess dress and walking quite happily. Her expression was a little smug. Behind the little girl was a Quetzalcoatlus the size of a hound. It seemed to have just hatched a few days ago. At this moment she was tying it around her neck with a pink rope, and then walking it like walking a dog. The newly hatched Quetzalcoatlus was not big, but its eyes were full of fierceness. Occasionally when someone passed by nearby, it would open its mouth and growl. It also raised its dragon wings and pretended to pounce. The growth cycle of dragon creatures was slow, but they had combat power very early. The baby dragon could fight as soon as it was born and ate the dragon egg. The pure-blooded baby dragon had a challenge level of 1 when it was born, and it could easily kill an adult man without combat training. In 3 to 5 days the baby dragon would grow fangs and claws, and the challenge level would increase to level 2 to 3, and be able to kill some newly advanced professions. Although the Quetzalcoatlus in front of him seemed to have just hatched, it was still easy to kill 1 or 2 adults. The untamed Quetzalcoatlus was full of ferocity, and it was being pulled forward by Vivian with a rope. The little girl's it seemed that it had suffered a lot at the hands of the little girl after it hatched. The dragon whelps would not treat the first person they saw as their parents. The dragon race's hereditary memory was no joke. They could still tell the difference even if they did not look alike at all and smelled completely different. It was a lot more dangerous to raise a sky dragon than a wild wolf cub. That was why Soren didn't want the girl to raise one. Brother? Vivian soon discovered Soren behind them. The little girl let out a cheerful cry, and then used a rope to pull the Quetzalcoatlus over. The newly hatched Quetzalcoatlus could not fly yet, and its running speed was not fast either. It was forced to crawl forward. Look? Vivian looked as if she was presenting a treasure. She raised the pink rope and kicked the Quetzalcoatlus with her little foot. She pulled the Quetzalcoatlus in front of Soren and said happily, "The dragon egg hatched. Big brother, look. It's called Little Black. Doesn't it look very impressive?" Little Black, Soren's mouth twitched when he heard that. He then forced himself to nod and said, "Yes, it looks very impressive." Vivian laughed happily when she heard that. She then waved her little hand and led the Quetzalcoatlus forward. She wanted to take it for a walk so that the others could get to know it. The people here were quite violent. She didn't want Little Black to be killed by these ferocious guys the next time it went out to play. The little girl's steps were very happy. Her little hand was holding a rope, and she was dragging the ferocious Quetzalcoatlus behind her. Occasionally, other people would be shocked when they saw her. Everyone would probably know that the young mistress had a dragon by tomorrow, but it was indeed very impressive. Other people were walking dogs, but she was walking a dragon. Seeing the little girl so happy, Soren could only shake his head and let her be. Dinner time. Vivian came back with the Quetzalcoatlus. The newly hatched Quetzalcoatlus had a huge appetite. If there was enough food, they could gain 3 to 5 pounds a day. In about half a year, this Quetzalcoatlus could reach a weight of about 1,000 pounds. The cat girl in a small maid costume was responsible for feeding it. She carried a big wooden bucket with one hand, which was filled with fresh fish that was sent over from the port. The little cat girl seemed to be very playful. She grabbed a fish and threw it here and there. The Quetzalcoatlus in front of her stretched its neck and caught the fish with its head. It opened its mouth and swallowed the foot-long fish in one bite. It had just hatched for a day or two, and this Quetzalcoatlus could already eat a bucket full of fresh fish. Occasionally, the little cat girl would pick up a fresh fish and smell it. She seemed to like the smell of the fish. Unfortunately, she didn't dare to put it into her mouth after looking around. Because if she ate the fish raw, Vivian would teach her a lesson. She was a little afraid of Vivian. Especially when she was wearing a black princess dress, the little cat girl always felt bad and scared. A quiet day passed by just like that. Soren began to analyze the spell model of Melf's minute meteors after nightfall. Perhaps because of the accumulation of the previous few days, his research progress was slightly faster now. A magic lamp was lit in the spacious room. It felt like a 100-watt light bulb. This was an alchemy tool brought over by Gloria. There were also some alchemy tools made by the wizard Saruman. Because there were 2 more orthodox wizards around him, Soren also began to enjoy some of the more advanced conveniences. Most of the time, the wizard world was full of a sci-fi fantasy world. Soren still thought that there was not much difference between golems and highly intelligent robots. In some fields, golems were even more superior than robots. Soren, who was in a state of research, forgot about the passage of time. He didn't know how much time had passed. When he came back to his senses from the spell research, the sky was completely dark. Tap tap tap. A very light sound of footsteps approached from a distance, and then stopped in front of Soren's door. Vivian? Soren listened for a while, then put down the quill in his hand, and then put away a large stack of white paper. With the improvement of his strength, his perception and listening ability became stronger and stronger. The possibility of other rogues wanting to sneak attack Soren was quite low. Even in daily life he was more sensitive than before. He got up and gently opened the door and then saw the little girl standing in front of the door. Vivian was wearing a pure white nightgown and pink cotton slippers on her feet. There seemed to be a little tears in her beautiful big eyes, as if she had just woken up and was still a little confused. Brother? The little girl opened her small hands and threw herself into Soren's arms. Drops of tears fell from her beautiful big eyes. Soren quickly hugged the little girl in front of him, leaned over and kissed her forehead. He raised his hand and stroked her back and said softly, "What's wrong? Why are you suddenly crying?" Vivian buried her little head in Soren's arms like a little kitten, and then whispered, "Brother, I dreamed of Heath. Heath, that loyal old dog." Soren's face showed a rare trace of sadness and nostalgia. He gently hugged the little girl in front of him, kissed her on the cheek and said softly, "Don't cry. We buried Heath in the cemetery. He will rest in peace in the kingdom of the god of the underworld." Perhaps it was because she had a new pet, the little girl remembered the old dog that grew up with her. Soren was a cold person. There were not many people that he respected, and that old dog did what many people couldn't do. It was a loyal old dog. Soren could still remember how old the old dog was, but it still stood firmly by the little girl's side. Unfortunately, it didn't even have a full meal before it died. Instead, it lay in a corner and died peacefully, because Soren had come back to life. And its mission was completed. Faith kept the old and hungry dog alive until Soren woke up. Then it relieved itself of its burden and left peacefully in a deep sleep. Soren buried it in the cemetery because it was qualified to do so. Brother? Vivian seemed to feel a lot better after being touched by Soren. She raised her head and looked at Soren and whispered, "Vivian has become so powerful. Can you bring Heath back to life?" "I miss him a lot." Silence. Soren fell silent. He stroked the little girl's long hair and kissed her forehead, but he didn't answer her question. Vivian seemed to have understood something. She curled up in Soren's arms with a sad expression. "Heath?" The little girl's voice was choked with sobs. She murmured, "Is he really dead? Will he never come back? Hoo hoo hoo. P.S. That's all for today. I'll probably finish it in 10 chapters. Chapter 350. 3 days passed quietly. Soren was busy analyzing the spell model of Melf's Minute Meteors, and Gloria had been setting up a magic circle to seal off all the shadow cracks. It was easy to have accidents when infiltrating across planes. Whether it was the conflict of the plane's law causing mutations, or the creatures of the shadow plane sneaking into the material plane, it would be a very troublesome thing. So for Gloria, before unraveling the mystery of the shadow plane, she had to make sure that she could enter and exit freely. As a proper wizard, she would definitely leave a safe way out for herself. Soren's reckless behavior of going in and exploring belonged to the standard style of a rogue. Last night, Gloria came to Soren's place for the night, and she also mentioned Vivian's matter. She didn't know what happened to the little girl recently. She actually asked her a lot of questions about the soul level. She even asked where the soul would go after death, and how long a pure soul could exist without reincarnation. The final place where the soul of a living creature would go after death, and the law of the soul's existence and transformation. There were a lot of things that even Gloria didn't know. After all, she was just a wizard who had just touched the legendary realm. Maybe she had mastered the technique of injecting soul fragments into the rune life, but she couldn't explain a lot of knowledge about the soul level. Vivian carefully recorded everything down, and then asked her about some knowledge about legendary spells. At this point, Gloria also told Soren very seriously that the little girl seemed to have asked something about the legendary spell, Wish. This spell was also a taboo among wizards because it was a legendary spell that could theoretically fulfill most wishes, but it had a serious price to pay. The Wish spell could resurrect the dead, increase one's own power, increase one's attributes, and even make one immortal. In theory, this legendary spell could fulfill most of the wishes of mortals, but the price to pay was hard to say. Soren was silent when he heard this. But he didn't say much and just sighed softly. The Wish spell was one of the most difficult legendary spells to master. The difficulty of just remembering this spell was frightening, let alone fulfilling the requirements to cast it. This spell ultimately summoned an elemental jinn. The effect was a bit like Aladdin's magic lamp. It might summon a jinn, or it might summon an earth jinn, or it might even summon the oldest elemental god. Currently, there were only a few people in the world who knew this legendary spell. In the blink of an eye, another day had passed. Soren's analysis of the spell model of Melf's Minute Meteors was finally on the right track, and the progress was close to 45%. As his progress increased, his mastery of the spell model became faster and faster. He estimated that it wouldn't take long for him to memorize it. However, on this day the fleet of the Church of Wealth finally arrived at Port Mordor, and they also transported a lot of manpower and materials. Motor. This was the name given by Gloria. It originated from the divination of the northern witches. It was a character with a special meaning. She performed a simple divination on this place and finally decided to use this name. Soren didn't really care about this, so he directly named this place Mordor. The Church of Wealth formed a huge fleet. Their abundant financial resources allowed them to directly use ocean-going ships for transportation. When Soren had just arrived at Port Mordor, he saw groups of sallow and emaciated slaves being escorted down. These were all slaves from the mines. The Church of Wealth secretly controlled many mines, which needed a large number of slaves, and the probability of slaves working in the mines was very high. The Church of Wealth secretly controlled a large number of slave trades. Of course, money was not so clean, otherwise they would not cooperate with Soren, the pirate leader. The slaves transported by the Church of Wealth were very messy. Most of them were humans, but there were also other races. Soren even saw a small number of gray dwarfs. These were first-class slaves. They were the kind of durable slaves that were welcomed by many slave mines because they had been controlled by spirit flayers for a long time. Your Excellency. After the half-elf first mate received these slaves, he trotted over and said, "The statistics have been completed. A total of 632 slaves were transported, most of which were humans and a small number of other races. 32 of them were infected and some of them had died on the way here. They were thrown into the sea by them. Shall I go and settle them down now?" "Yes." Soren nodded slightly and did not have too much sympathy for the slaves. Such slaves could be seen everywhere in the world, and the slavery system was deeply rooted and even supported by many churches. Many of the past concepts were completely meaningless. Soon the slaves were escorted to the city of Mordor. Then a gold priestess appeared in front of Soren. He didn't know why, but he always felt that this woman was too eye-catching. Maybe it was the gold color of her body that made Soren a little itchy. Everyone knew the habits of rogues. It was easy for them to not be able to control themselves when they saw such a tycoon. They wanted to sneak up and steal something valuable. Even if the jewelry on this woman was not a rare item, it was estimated to be worth more than 50 or 60,000 Kindler coins. High-grade priests were quite rich, and the priest of the goddess of wealth was even richer. Your Excellency. Gold came to Soren with a smile, then made a gesture toward the port and smiled. Then we'll start first. Rumble. A silent loud noise came from the port, and it immediately attracted the attention of many people. Then they saw several of the ocean-going ships put down their decks, then open the heavy hatch and let some huge puppet golems out. Most of them were clay golems and stone golems. These golems were about 3 meters tall, and they came to the port with dull footsteps. Then they moved forward under the control of a grade 3 wizard, and soon they arrived near the land that Soren had promised to the Temple of Wealth. Rumble. There was a loud sound of collapsing, and then there was the sound of rocks being flattened. The dozen or so puppet golems pushed forward like a large road roller. The stone golems were responsible for breaking the rocks, and the clay golems' bodies were slightly deformed. Then they worked like a small excavator and soon the land was flattened. Golem craftsmanship. Soren's expression was a little shocked, and he was a little startled before he came back to his senses. The scene in front of him was quite impactful. Compared with primitive human labor, the golems in front of him were like the difference between modern technology and ancient civilization. However, this method consumed a lot of resources. There was no elemental pool in the wizard tower to charge the puppet golems. Such a large energy consumption must be made up with money. This difference was like the comparison of fuel consumption between riding a motorcycle and driving a tank. The golems' work efficiency was very high. They should be specially designed golems, not for fighting. In a very short time, the golems flattened the land and began to build a foundation. The clay golem was able to carry a large stone that required 2 adult men to carry, and the clay golem was able to carry it quickly with one hand. The stone golem could even lift a stone that weighed several tons and carry it away. Their work efficiency was probably higher than that of excavators and cranes, because the latter still needed people to operate, while the golems could be carried away directly. Your Excellency. Gold's face was a little proud and he said proudly, "The strength of the Temple of Wealth will never let you down. At this rate, the port will be completed in half a month at most." Soren did not speak, because the scene in front of him gave him a feeling of being ahead of an era. While he was still desperately relying on human labor to operate, the hands of others had begun to give him the illusion of being semi-mechanized. Golems. Soren looked at these golems and could not help but fall into deep thought. Gloria's golems could not be brought out. They belonged to the Witch Council. She only brought a clay golem that was responsible for cleaning. However, Soren thought of another thing. War of the Golems? It was a big event that Soren remembered very deeply. It was also this event that let the world know the terrible strength of the legendary Sword Saint. The War of the Golems had not yet broken out. If no one triggered the red alert in the ruins, or if someone lifted the battle command of the Golem army in advance, would the War of the Golems eventually break out? If the Golem army was not destroyed, how much fighting power could they exert? One must know. At that time, some people estimated that their fighting power was equivalent to the main army of a duchy. If the Golem army had not triggered the red alert and went berserk, it would not have forced many legendary masters to appear in the end. Even the legendary Sword Saint would not have appeared on the battlefield of the War of the Golems. These golems seemed to have been given a final command to destroy everything, but before the command took effect, they were buried and sealed in the ruins. Later, some people explored the ruins and paid a heavy price to find the skeletons of the undead and demons. Some people speculated that a terrible plague of the undead broke out, or the demons invaded here, so the Golem army was given the final command to destroy everything. Someone could change this command, maybe everything would be different. Soren fell into deep thought. The War of the Golems was a battle of the legendary level. Many legendary masters had appeared one after another. The difficulty of exploring the ruins was also at the same level as that of the evil creatures in the desert. If he did not bring a legendary team in, he might not even know how he died. Note: most of the ruins related to the Arcane Empire were of the legendary level. The difficulty might not be much lower than the Wizard Tower in the Shadow Plane. P.S. Today's update. Tomorrow is almost done. There will be a surprise at the end of the month. Chapter 351. It was a sunny and windy day. In the morning it drizzled a little, making the road a little muddy, but soon the sky was clear. It was almost February and it was time to plant. With the help of thousands of slaves, Soren finally dug a ditch connecting the river and built a simple dam with the help of mud to stone. There was no doubt about the role of spellcasters. Mud to stone was jointly cast by Gloria and Vivian, and it was completed in just 2 days. Such a dam could transform mud into complete stones, and the effect was estimated to be much better than cement. The well-connected ditches were distributed in nearly 5,000 acres of arable land. This was the first land that Soren reclaimed. The abundant slaves allowed him to exploit the value of labor without worry. According to his estimation, he would complete at least 10,000 acres of land this year. 10,000 acres of land was enough to easily complete the self-sufficiency of Mordor. As long as self-sufficiency was achieved, Soren basically had no worries. Food, land, and population. These 3 elements were more precious than gold in chaotic times, and they were also the key to the realm of the gods in the future. Rumble. Suddenly, a muffled sound came from Soren's residence, and then Soren stood up excitedly. But it was a little different from the past. There were 2 fireballs floating in his palms about the size of a fist. The flames were formed in a highly condensed state, and then suspended in his palms. As he moved, the flames jumped out of his palms. Melf's Minute Meteor. After such a long time, Soren finally remembered this level 3 spell. Rumble. Soren stood in place and took a deep breath, then looked at the surrounding environment. Then he jumped directly and rose to a height of about 12 meters. Then he waved his hand violently and a fist-sized fireball whizzed out. Unlike the fireball spell, this flame was like a shot put, not an energy form like the fireball spell. The fist-sized fireball whizzed out at an amazing speed. The next moment, it hit the target in front of him, and then the target exploded into pieces of wood, leaving only a bare wooden handle. Boom. Boom. Explosions were heard one after another. In just 1 second, 5 targets were blown up in front of Soren. These training targets were basically blown to smithereens. Occasionally, 1 or 2 of them would be pierced through the middle and explode. The lethality was quite shocking. Even if Soren used the Elven War Bow +2 at full strength, he still wouldn't be able to penetrate these wooden targets that were almost 10 centimeters thick. Bang! Soren landed on one knee. The 2 fireballs floating above his palms had dimmed significantly. In less than a second, with his astonishing agility, he had launched 5 attacks in an instant. Melf's Minute Meteor, Extreme Spell. The lethality of Melf's Minute Meteor, which used Extreme Spell to turn into a level 5 spell, was a little beyond Soren's estimation. He could only make such lethality by slashing with his sword with all his strength, but this spell only needed to be thrown out. With Soren's current spellcasting level, a Melf's Minute Meteor, Extreme Spell, could make 11 attacks. According to his current attack speed, if he didn't consider the hit rate, he could finish it in 2 or 3 seconds. In the time it took him to be distracted, he could consecutively throw out more than 10 Melf's Minute Meteors. Rumble. All the targets were smashed, and Soren could only target the wall next to him. A Melf's Minute Meteor hit the wall, and a dent immediately appeared on the wall. The depth was close to 5 centimeters, and there was also a small explosion effect. The lethality was similar to an arcane missile. In other words, Soren's Minute Meteor's lethality was more than 30 points. Currently, he could only deal about 40 points of lethality without using his sword. Of course, as a level 3 spell, the role of Melf's Minute Meteor was not limited to this. The Minute Meteor it sent out was equivalent to a +5 level rare grade weapon, which could be easily converted to +5 penetration level. Most supernatural life forms could not be completely immune to the damage caused by it. Rumble. 5 consecutive Minute Meteors were smashed out, and a hole was directly blasted in the wall. Then the whole wall gradually cracked and finally collapsed. Your Excellency. Soon the voice of the pirate patrol guards came from outside, and a patrol team who heard the movement rushed over. Soren stopped, glanced at them and waved his hand. It's okay. You guys go to the warehouse and get some armor. Leather armor, mail armor, inlaid armor and half-body armor, all of them. The subordinates quickly followed the order. About a few minutes later they moved a pile of armor over. Soren waved his sword and made a temporary wooden frame, and then he asked people to put the leather armor on. 2 level 5 spell slots were memorized with Melf's Minute Meteor, maximized spell. Soren chanted again to cast the spell, and then 2 fist-sized fireballs appeared in his palm. He first smashed the wooden frame of the first leather armor. With a muffled sound, the leather armor exploded on the spot, and the front of the chest was blown out. The second experiment was the mail armor. Soren waved his hand and sent out a minute meteor. In the muffled explosion, the middle of the mail armor exploded, and a hole of about 10 centimeters appeared. Then it was the inlaid armor, and this one was even more blown out. However, when Soren tested the half-body armor, the effect was much worse. Because the half-body armor was more complete, it could be understood as a simpler full-body armor. Melf's minute meteor only blew out a hole, and it didn't directly destroy the armor. With Soren's current spell power and the ability, Maximize Spell, this was the limit of what he could crush. The half-body armor could barely protect against the damage of the minute meteor, and the full-body armor's effect would be better. The other armors were basically like paper under the penetration effect of a +5 rare-grade weapon. This effect is comparable to a high-explosive grenade. Soren waved his hand in satisfaction, and a hole was blown out in the ground, and then he ordered, "Clean up these things." The lethality was quite amazing. It was worth Soren's time to memorize it. The only disadvantage was that each spell only had 11 minute meteor bullets, and the hit rate had to be controlled by oneself. The minute meteor speed was very fast, but whether it could hit the target or not depended on one's accuracy. This spell couldn't be controlled by the mind. To explain it in terms of data, it needed one's own hit rate. In this regard, Soren had an unintentional advantage because no pure wizard could have a higher hit rate than him. A simple tidying up. Soren got up and went to the port to check. Because of the support of the Temple of Wealth, Port Mordor, which had the natural advantage of a port, had been initially completed. Now there was no problem with docking a batch of ships, and the next thing to do was to further expand the port. On the other side of the land sold to the Temple of Wealth, a house had now been built, but there was still only a foundation in the center, because that was where the Temple of Wealth was built. This group of filthy rich people actually insisted on using blocks of marble to build the temple. Anyone who knew a little about architecture knew how much manpower and money it would take to build all with white marble. There was not much marble nearby, and no marble mine had been found, so the materials to build the temple might have to be transported from other places. The somewhat paranoid priests of wealth thought that only white marble was worthy of the Temple of the Lady of Wealth, so they used a fleet to transport it from other places. This was simply wasteful to the point of making one's hair stand on end. They crossed the sea just to transport some marble to build the temple. You had to say that they were really rich. Soren couldn't ask what others did. Anyway, the land had been sold to them, and if they wanted to build the temple with marble, let them transport it slowly. If the Temple of Wealth developed too quickly in the port, Soren was a little worried. Priest Jean was still bedecked in jewels. This woman was actually quite beautiful, and she was quite experienced in dealing with people. Only her nouveau riche clothes made people feel uncomfortable, especially when there were too many unclean pirates here. When she saw Soren, she seemed to want to come over and talk to him, but at this time, a somewhat broken warship came into the port. The flag on it was broken, and it was hanging Soren's black flag. There was a situation. Soren's pupils shrank and he rushed over in an instant. The warship quickly approached the port, and from afar there were a lot of bloodstains and some corpses on the deck. All of them were pirates under Soren's command, and some of them were elite troops that he had a good impression of. Now all of them were lying on the deck as corpses. The battleship was covered with marks of swords and sabers. It was obvious that it had been through a fierce battle. Even the mast had traces of being hit by cannons. Some parts of the cabin were leaking slightly. The entire battleship was severely damaged. Your Excellency, throat cutter. Scarface, who was covered in blood, limped out with the help of an elite pirate. His left arm was already gone and it was tightly wrapped with bandages. This kind of injury could not be stopped bleeding, and the wound was burned to death to seal the arteries. The nearly 1.9-meter tall northern man pushed away his men who were supporting him, then staggered to the front of Soren. Then he knelt down with a thud and said with a face full of grief and indignation, "Your subordinate is incompetent. Snake Island has been captured by Asrid. Our brothers have all suffered heavy casualties, and we barely managed to break out and escape. But Snake Island has already been burned down by them." Crack. The wooden planks under Soren's feet cracked inch by inch, and his face turned pale in an instant. A strong murderous aura made everyone uneasy. How is this possible? Soren growled from his teeth and said angrily, "Astrid's elites are all stationed on the Eastern Sea route. How could they have the ability to secretly attack Snake Island?" Scarface lowered his head and said with shame, "It's the people from the Rossard Merchant Guild. We did not expect Astrid to secretly collude with the Principality of Rossard. They ambushed Snake Island and caught us off guard. The Principality of Rossard? Soren gradually calmed down and said in a low voice, Rossard Merchant Guild? The Principality of Rossard? The Duke of Red Dragon's wife? Astrid has joined forces with them? What about the Sea Temple? Such important news. Did the Sea Temple not respond at all? Snake Island was attacked, did they not rescue? Scarface's expression was a little gloomy and he said slowly, we sent out people to ask for help, but Snake Island fell too quickly. There is no news from the Sea Temple and I don't know if the Sea Temple knows about this. Naga Siren Priest. Soren's eyes narrowed when he heard the words, and he stomped his feet, and the ground shattered. How could they not know it all? Port Tylon was not far from Snake Island. Soren had stockpiled a lot of supplies there, and he had sent a lot of troops to guard it. It was not so easy to capture Snake Island. How could the Sea Temple not know about it? Soren took a deep breath. The oppressive atmosphere made the others nearby not dare to breathe. After a while, he helped Scarface up in front of him and said in a deep voice, Can you still fight? Scarface, who thought he was going to die, suddenly raised his head and said with determination, Yes. Snake Island fell. He almost thought that he was going to die. After all, it was a very important base for Soren, and he had stockpiled a lot of supplies. As the pirate leader of the Shipwreck Bay route, his responsibility was undoubtedly the greatest. It would not be strange if His Excellency Throat Cutter directly killed him. Priest Kim. Soren turned around and looked at the Priest of Wealth next to him. He bowed slightly and said, Sorry to trouble you. Priest Kim's expression was also a little dignified. He nodded gently and said, It's a small matter. Limb regeneration is not a troublesome magic. He will soon be able to fight again. Okay. Soren nodded slightly and then ordered his men in a deep voice, Gather everyone to the council hall. A dignified atmosphere spread in the port of Mordor. The pirates who were originally fooling around all became well-behaved. All of them gathered with solemn expressions. One by one, the pirate leaders hurriedly rushed to the meeting hall. Their expressions were all rather solemn, as if a storm was about to arrive. Half-elf first mate, Casa. Red-haired female pirate Adele, Isabella. Drow warrior leader Dark Blade, Andre. Scarface. One-eyed dragon. Tiger Shark. Knight. Butler. Soren's pirate leaders gathered in the council hall. Scarface, who had just regained his left hand, had a fierce expression. He had been silently wiping his sword. Soren stood in the middle of the hall. He looked around at the pirate leaders and said in a deep voice, Snake Island has fallen. The hall was very quiet. The other pirate leaders obviously knew the news before they came. There was no fear in their eyes. On the contrary, there was a kind of bloodthirsty excitement. This period of silence made them thirsty for blood and slaughter. After all, they were all fierce and bloodthirsty pirates in the past. As they had witnessed the establishment of Mordor City with their own eyes, these pirate leaders had enough confidence in Soren. So their first reaction after hearing the news was that they no longer had to stay in their nests to build. Snake Island had fallen. His Excellency Throat Cutter must be furious. There was almost no doubt that he would go to war with the pirate king Ashrod. Soren's expression was cold. He glanced around the hall and said in a deep voice, Gather the men. Adele Isabella. You go and gather the pirate fleet in Shipwreck Bay. One-eyed dragon. You go to Port Tylon to gather men and ask the Sea Temple for support. Casa, half-elf first mate. You lead the dragon-headed ship to cut off the eastern route. Don't let any ships of Ashrod near the south coast. Dark Blade, Andre. You send someone to inform the High Priest of the Drows. They must send men to fight in this battle. Others, gather your men and follow me. This time we want to fight with Ashrod. Face open. Fight. P.S. That's all for today. A chapter of 4,500 words. It should be 2 chapters tomorrow. Chapter 352. Following Soren's order. The whole of Modo began to operate crazily. All the pirate minions who were lazily gathered in the taverns began to gather, and the materials stored in the warehouse were transported out in batches. Although Soren had stored a large amount of materials on Snake Island, the important part was still transported to Modo City because this was Soren's base camp. Whether it was weapons, food, ammunition, etc., they were basically enough to meet the needs of the camp. The atmosphere of a war filled the air. Teams of patrol guards began to gather, and rare-grade weapons from the north were distributed in large numbers. Dragon leather armor was armed to the elite pirate guards, and the equipment on the drows were all replaced. Soren also had a lot of good things in his hands. Although they were not great equipment as a pirate king, it was not difficult to take out a batch of rare grade 1 equipment. Many pirate leaders called for people to gather, and the warships docked near the port moved all the goods down, and then replaced them with batches of ammunition, weapons and medical supplies. Even the blacksmith's shop was filled with the sound of sharpening knives. After being lazy for a month or two, they were finally going to war. After killing the pirate king Ashrod, Soren would completely dominate the south coast. As long as one was not an idiot, one could see that Soren's focus was on the outer islands. In other words, if the pirate king Ashrod was defeated, the Eastern Sea route would need a pirate leader to manage it. Whether it was the half-elf first mate, the red-haired female pirate Adele Isabella, or other pirate leaders, they all thought that they also had a chance to compete for the leadership of the Eastern Sea route. If they could be entrusted with the important task of managing the Eastern Sea route by Soren, it would be a position that was second only to one person. Mr. Kim. Near the port, a young woman in a cloak said, "Is that throat cutter really planning to go to war with Ashrod? Ashrod has the support of the Naga royal family behind him, and recently I heard that he has hooked up with the vicious Duke of Red Dragon's wife. A legendary dragon disciple is not easy to deal with, and he may not have much chance of winning." Kim had a playful smile on his face and slowly said, "Isn't that good? Pirate King Ashrod is openly provoking him. He can't back down now. If he did not counterattack in such a situation, the throat cutter's status and reputation would suffer a heavy blow. However, even with the support of the Sea Temple, his chances of winning are not very high. If he loses, we can take the opportunity to make more demands." The young woman's expression seemed a little strange. She said slowly, "What if he loses?" Priest Jean glanced at him. His lips did not move, but his voice could be heard. "Then this place should have a new owner." The two looked at each other and smiled. The teachings of the Lady of Wealth were completely egoistic, which was why they were in the neutral camp, and more often than not, they were inclined towards evil. Mordor City. Soren's mansion. Gloria appeared in Soren's room wearing a black robe. She said with a serious expression, "Are we going to fight? The Duke of Red Dragon's wife is not easy to deal with." Soren nodded. "Yes, I know. But the current situation is already difficult to back down. I have risen in the sea for too short a time. Because I defeated the Swamp King head-on, it deterred others and made the other forces near the south coast not dare to act rashly. But if such a thing happens and I don't do anything, then others may take the opportunity to bite back. They will think that I am not strong enough. At that time, not only the pirate king Ashrod, but I am afraid that the Storm Lord of the Amazon, the Chamber of Commerce Alliance on the south coast, and even the Sea Temple may bite back." Soren's sense of smell had always been very sharp. When he heard the news of the fall of Snake Island, he had already realized that this war was inevitable. Even if it was now the season for farming in Mordor City, the Shadow Plain needed to be explored slowly, and the nearby indigenous people needed to be cleaned up. But in fact he did not have so much time. If he did not start a war, it would be a serious blow to the morale of his men. At that time, his men in Port Tylon and Shipwreck Bay might be disloyal. After all, the time of Soren's rise was too short. His prestige had been accumulated through numerous victories and cruel massacres. He absolutely could not allow the enemy to stand above him and provoke him. "That's good." With Gloria's wisdom, she understood after a little thought. She nodded gently and said, "I'll go with you." "No." Soren shook his head at this time and said, "You must stay in Mordor City. At this time, I don't trust others to stay in the base camp. Only with you here can I fight with peace of mind." Gloria could not help but look at Soren worriedly and whispered, "But I'm afraid you don't have much chance of winning against the Duke of Red Dragon's wife. Not to mention the Naga Siren royal family behind the pirate king Ashrod." Soren was silent for a moment, then said, "The Sea Temple will definitely make a move. The gap between the two sides is not big." Gloria shook her head gently and said, "In this case, the Sea Temple may not go all out. Otherwise Snake Island would not fall so easily." There was a short silence. Just when Soren was about to speak, Vivian's voice suddenly came from outside the door. She seemed to be eager to try. "Brother? There's still me. Leave that bullshit Duke of Red Dragon's wife to me." The little girl was wearing a black princess dress. Her expression seemed to be a little excited. Her cute little face was full of the desire to fight, as if she had been holding it in. There's more. Vivian had a bloodthirsty smile at the corner of her mouth. She stretched out her little hand and grabbed the cat girl next to her, and said in a crisp voice, "And Lulu is also very powerful. She can fight 3 by herself. No, at least 5. No, maybe 10 of them." The poor cat girl was held by Vivian by the corner of her clothes. She was as obedient as a puppy. When she saw Vivian's gaze turn to her, she quickly nodded desperately and said, "Meow. Lulu is very powerful. What? Wanna fight 10? Meow." The little cat girl stretched out her claws. She felt that one claw was not enough to count to 10, so she quickly stretched out the other claw. Beastmen had the ability to transform. In the battle state, part of the body's characteristics may change from human to beast characteristics. Lulu had extraordinary agility at such a young age, so her bloodline must be more unusual. "Vivian?" Gloria fell into deep thought, then looked up and said, "The odds of winning are not very high. I have to set up a magic circle on your warship so that I can use it as a teleportation beacon. I can support you at any time when necessary." Soren did not refuse. After all, a legendary dragon disciple was really not easy to deal with. He nodded gently. But at this moment, suddenly Gloria raised her head, looked around and said coldly, "Who is it? Who is it? Please come out and meet me." Soren clenched his curved sword in an instant, and his whole body was tense, ready to fight. Vivian also narrowed her eyes and carefully looked around. Only Lulu did not move and she still looked silly. Soren's perception was definitely not worse than Gloria's. Lulu, as a beast man, should have the strongest intuition, but even she did not have any reaction. The most likely possibility was that the visitor was not in the current space. Only the nature of the plane close to Soren could not detect it. As a northern witch with prophecy, Gloria could detect it. "Daughter." A magnetic voice full of charm sounded, and then a figure covered in a black robe appeared outside the door. She raised her head and looked at Gloria in front of her, then turned her eyes to Soren next to her and said slowly, "Long time no see. It seems that you are about to become a legendary. Sure enough, your vision is always better than mine." Gloria's mother? Corinne? Soren was a little stunned when he saw her, but he did not relax at all. When Gloria saw her mother, she could not help but frown, and then her face changed greatly. "Mother. You?" "Yes." The fallen northern witch nodded gently, and her expression was unprecedentedly calm and said slowly, "I have fallen. I made a deal with a powerful existence in the lower plane. The aura of a demon." Soren's perception was quite sharp. When he heard this sentence, he immediately noticed a trace of a demon's aura. Gloria's expression was serious and she said slowly, "What are you doing here?" The fallen northern witch got up and walked into the room. After seeing Vivian next to her, she was a little surprised, but then she said calmly, "To help you. The news of you coming to the south coast spread widely, and I guessed that you were here. I didn't expect to encounter such a thing. If you want to deal with Ashrod, I can help you." Gloria's expression did not relax at all. Instead, there was a kind of sadness from the bottom of her heart and she sighed, "What do you want?" In the end her mother fell. Although she foresaw some fragments of the future, she did not expect that she would actually make a deal with a demon. Fortunately, it was not a demon. Otherwise, her soul might be in the contents of the deal. "It's him." Gloria's mother looked up at Soren, and then did something that even Soren did not expect. She bowed slightly to express her respect and then said, "Your Excellency Throat Cutter. Please forgive my ignorance and short-sightedness in the past. In the past, pride, regret, and jealousy blinded my heart." Unimaginable. Not only was Soren shocked, but even Gloria was in disbelief. Was this really her mother? That arrogant and mean woman. Why did she have a completely different feeling after she fell? It was as if her soul was sublimated. In Gloria's memory, she had never seen her mother apologize. Not to mention in such a humble manner, recounting her mistakes in the past, and at the same time, her expression was so calm. Gloria took a deep breath. The change in front of her seemed to be unexpected, and she said in a deep voice, "Mother, what do you want? I don't believe that you would come here for no reason." Gloria's mother looked at Soren again and slowly said, "Him. The man outside of fate. The man who stood up when the goddess of fortune flipped the coin of fate. When I first met him he was still an unknown thief. But now he's the ruler of the South Coast, and he's on the verge of becoming a legend. I have enough reason to believe that he is the man outside of fate, and only he can change my fate. I don't have too many requests, I just want him to change my fate when I am bound to fail. In return, I'm willing to give him anything he wants. Gloria's mother turned her eyes to her daughter, and seemed to notice the distrust on her daughter's face. Because she was a fallen one, a witch who made a deal with demons, even her own daughter didn't believe her words. This discovery made Karina show a wry smile on her face, and she slowly said, "In the past, I was confused by pride and prejudice. After leaving the north, I went to a lot of places, and finally I figured out one thing. That is, I am willing to give up something for what I pursue. Finally, I found the answer in the desert, and I have devoted all my efforts to it. I lost my husband, and I am about to lose my only daughter. I've spent my entire life on it. For it, I changed from a noble witch in the north to an exile and a fallen one. I will never give it up, so I am willing to give up everything for it. I gave up pride, remorse, harshness, dignity, body, soul, silence. A deathly silence. Soren didn't know what the fallen northern witch in front of him was referring to, and why she was willing to give up everything. But now the woman in front of him gave him a shock. A shock that was hard to describe with words. At this moment he couldn't help but think of himself when he walked barefoot for thousands of miles in the north. That moment of enlightenment and perseverance were so vivid in his memory. For Vivian he was willing to give up everything. There was something about the fallen northern witch in front of him that reminded him of déjà vu. Mother. Gloria's face showed a trace of sadness, and she murmured, "You?" Karina's expression was very calm. Even though she said such shocking words, she still looked quite calm, as if she was talking about something unimportant. She slowly said, "I am still me, but I was blinded by my soul in the past, and now I finally see through all the fog. Your Excellency Throat Cutter. My only request is that you can change my fate one day in the future. In return, I'm willing to give you everything. I can give you what my daughter can give you." Fallen witch was still so calm. That was real calmness, not a disguise of acting ability. She seemed to have found something in her heart, so her words touched people's hearts like the truth, and made people feel that she was real. This kind of reality was terrible. It was also respectable. At this moment, Soren's perception of her changed completely, because he found that the woman in front of him was the same kind of person as him. It was just that they pursued different things. Soren was doing it for Vivian, and she was doing it for something else. Gloria turned her eyes to Soren beside her. Her expression at this moment was quite complicated, with sadness, anger, sadness, and many other emotions that could not be expressed in words. Because the one standing in front of her was her mother. But now her biological mother had become a fallen witch who made a deal with the devil, and her soul might not even be in her hands. Trust. It was not as easy as imagined. Soren fell into silence. He looked at the fallen witch in front of him with a serious expression and said slowly, "Which demon lord did you make a deal with?" Silence. Fallen witch was silent. Her expression was difficult and bitter, and then she slowly took off her clothes, revealing her white and delicate skin that was like milk. There was a very strange tattoo on her chest near her ribs, which looked more like a birthmark. It was a red lip that was pierced by an iron wire. The red lip was so seductive, as if it was full of shocking beauty, and some kind of power that tempted people to fall into the deepest darkness. Soren's expression was ashen. Gloria's expression was quite ugly in an instant. She glared angrily at her mother and roared, "Demon! Demon! Girl! King! You're crazy! Do you know what the consequences of making a deal with her are? You idiot!" Soren had never seen Gloria so angry. She was always so elegant and moving, but at this moment she was completely different. Her anger. Her sorrow. It even affected Soren, who was next to her, making him feel how disappointed Gloria was at this moment. Fallen witch slowly pulled up her clothes. Even at this moment, her expression was very calm, and she slowly said, "I know. But only the succubus queen can give me what I want. I'm destined to be the loser of fate. So why don't I bet all my chips? Daughter, you're better than me. But there are some things you'll never understand." The succubus queen. Soren's expression was complicated, as if he didn't know what to say. He recognized the emblem of the succubus queen. It was a red lip pierced by an iron wire, a very special and shocking emblem. It was just like this troublesome demon lord. Anyone who made a deal with her would not have the slightest advantage, and in the end they would be eaten alive. She was one of the demon lords that Soren was most afraid of. The fallen witch in front of him actually had her emblem on her body. God knows what she put in the deal. After all, the demon lord of the abyss was the most evil and depraved existence. P.S. Yup. Got stuck yesterday. Just finished writing this chapter today. I don't know if you're satisfied. Anyway, I tried my best. Chapter 353. This night was destined to be special for many people. Just as Soren was actively preparing to deal with the pirate king Ashrod, a secret meeting was also held in Clear Spring Town, 150 kilometers north of Whiterun City. This was a rather remote town. Because it was close to Whiterun City, it was slightly affected by the ancient Red Dragon. However, people only knew that there was a Red Dragon near Whiterun City, but they didn't know that it was a terrible ancient Red Dragon. In this dark secret room, the 5 figures covered in cloaks sat down together. They looked at each other and then nodded gently. Let's begin. The first to speak was a woman, a very beautiful woman. This woman had a delicate face, but from her forehead to her chin, there was a shocking scar. The blood-red scar seemed to be a mark, making it so unforgettable at first glance. The beautiful woman tapped the table gently, then turned her gaze to the others and said slowly, "Since we are all here, then let's discuss how to deal with Reinhardt. I don't know how he got the Helpheimer, but now even the chief priest was defeated by him. The elites in the Church of Fear have been wiped out, and it won't be long before they fall into his control." The atmosphere gradually stiffened. The others present looked at each other and seemed to be silent at this moment. That's right. They were all children of fear. Since the vampires and even Reinhardt became gods with the vampire ghost godhood, the other sons of fear felt uneasy. This made them, who should have been hunting each other, unite in order to survive. The 5 people present got some connections by chance, and then there was the current roundtable meeting to discuss how to deal with the vampire god. What should we do now? The one who spoke was a rather strong man who seemed to be a barbarian, with extremely exaggerated muscles and a powerful body. He tapped the table gently and said in a deep voice, "Are we all going to sit and wait for death?" A cold and gloomy voice sounded. The thin man sitting in the left corner looked at the others and said slowly, "We can sit here, we should have a trace of trust in each other. Maybe if we join forces we may not be his opponent." Join forces. Hearing this, the others were silent. How to join forces? How could they guarantee that the others would go all out in battle? How could he guarantee that the other sons of fear would not stab him in the back? It was already difficult for them to sit together. The beautiful woman with a scar on her face glanced at the others who remained silent. Then she took out a file out of thin air and handed it to the 4 people present. She said slowly, "This is the information I've collected. Can you guys take a look?" The first one to pick it up was the skinny man. After quickly glancing through it, he handed it to the person next to him. Soon everyone had read through it. Throat cutter? The burly barbarian put down the scroll and asked, "What does this guy have to do with us?" The beautiful woman glanced at him with contempt in her eyes and said slowly, "Pay attention to the time of his rise. It just so happened that after the battle in the City of Wealth, he quickly rose to prominence in the South Coast. And there were other sons of fear in that battle." When she said this, the others present couldn't help but ponder. The man who had been silent at the beginning slowly said, "What do you mean? He is also a son of fear? This throat cutter can rise to prominence in the South Coast so quickly and become the Pirate King. He must be quite powerful. If we can win him over, our chances of winning will increase a lot." The beautiful woman sitting at the head chuckled and said, "It's not that simple. I think he is not only a son of fear but also the first son of fear to awaken. In other words, he is stronger than any of us." Silence. Hearing the words of the beautiful woman in front of them, everyone present was silent. After a long time, the skinny man sitting in the corner raised his head and said, "Then what should we do?" Soren couldn't predict what would happen in the southern part of the continent. In fact, he had already assembled the fleet and set off the next day, but he had one more thing to do before he set off. Dong dong dong. The dull sound of the war drums sounded. Soren came to the port wearing a black suit. Behind him was a team of heavily armed pirates, as well as elite pirates equipped with dragon leather armor and rare-grade weapons. Today was the day of the war. Soren needed to boost the morale and give his men the confidence to win. But he didn't say too much nonsense, nor did he promise any generous rewards because it wasn't needed at all. Dong. Soren stood on the high platform of the dock, his sharp eyes looked around at everyone present, and then said in a deep voice, "Raise the dragon head." Raise. Dragon head. Raise. Dragon head. A loud shout came from below him, and then he saw two burly and powerful elite pirates, each holding a huge dragon head, appear. The ferocious white dragon head was carried out. All the pirates who saw it with their own eyes couldn't help but show a hint of shock on their faces. Even Pastor Kim and others who stood by watching the ceremony were surprised. A white dragon head. And it looked like the head of an adult dragon. Raise. Along with the pirates' shouts, the white dragon's head was carried onto the warship, and finally fixed on the dragon head warship that defeated the Swamp King. This was the real dragon head warship. When the white dragon's head was hung on the giant dragon head warship, all the nearby pirates' eyes were red with blood. Many of them even hammered their chests with their hands, and roared with eagerness to fight. It's really a dragon head. A young woman's voice came from behind Pastor Kim and whispered, "It seems that we still underestimated him. This throat cutter actually managed to kill an adult dragon. He used the dragon head to declare war at this time, and it's quite amazing for the morale of his men. Look at the group of pirates below, they all seem to want to fight with Ashrod immediately." Dragon head warship. This warship that originally belonged to the Swamp King was truly complete at this moment. Soren stood on the high platform and looked down at everyone. His eyes paused on Gloria and Vivian for a moment, then he pulled out his curved sword and pointed directly at the distant sea. Rumble. Suddenly there was a vibration from the bottom of the sea, and then the water on all sides separated to the left and right. In the surging waves, a black mast emerged, and then a ghost ship full of death and slaughter emerged from the bottom of the sea in front of everyone's eyes. As the fog spread, the specter ship in front of everyone became blurry. Through the fog, they could only see the broken hull and sails, as well as the ghosts wandering on the specter ship. The aura of death spread. Pastor Kim's face was full of uncontrollable shock, and the girl standing behind her also opened her mouth in surprise. Ghost ship. Pastor Kim looked up at Soren's position and murmured, "He actually has a ghost ship. It looks like a ghost warship that's close to the legendary level." Ghost ship, Deadman's voice. The aura of death made the other pirates quiet down for a while, but there was a force brewing in everyone's heart. Soren looked down at them. Finally, he raised the curved sword in his hand and shouted, "Fight! Fight!" A uniform roar sounded, and the elite pirates all pulled out their weapons and roared towards the sky. "Fight!" Sauron let out another roar. "Fight!" The surrounding pirates reacted one after another, then followed the elite pirates and let out a roar at the same time. "Fight!" Soren's figure stood high up, his tall and straight body like a mountain, and roared towards the sky. "Fight!" A deafening roar resounded, and all the pirates drew their weapons. Their expressions were incomparably excited as they let out a series of roars. "What a powerful guy." Pastor Kim looked at Soren, who stood high up, and murmured, "This guy is a master at playing with people's hearts. The morale of these pirates is probably going to explode." The young woman nodded and said in a low voice, "It seems that we have to re-evaluate him." On the other side, Vivian stood in the corner and looked at Soren, who was above the crowd. There was a glimmer of brilliance in her eyes and she murmured, "Brother looks so powerful now." Gloria, who was next to him, did not reply, but her eyes became gentler. Only Fallen, which still had a calm expression, and her eyes fell on Soren. There were only some slight movements, but it could be seen that she was not as calm as she looked on the surface. The battle broke out. The two most powerful pirate kings on the south coast were going to compete. The winner would win the hegemony of the south coast. And the loser would not even have a corpse left. The Storm Lord, who had been dominating the Amazon coast, seemed to be quite silent. She had not expanded her power outside the Amazon territory for nearly 100 years. It seemed that she intended to watch the battle between the pirate kings coldly. No one knew who would be the final winner. So in this battle, the other forces on the south coast chose to be silent and wait for the final result. P.S. That's all for today. The end of this volume was written very slowly. Chapter 354. South Coast Snake Island. The dragon-headed warship docked near Soren's former base camp. From a distance, one could see the traces of the fire on Snake Island. The entire camp had turned into ashes, and there were masts erected near the dock. There seemed to be something hanging on them, floating with the whistling sea breeze. A large number of seabirds gathered near the dock. When the warship approached, they were immediately startled. The dark flock of birds scattered in all directions, and then the corpses hanging on the masts were revealed. All of them were Soren's men. After the fall of Snake Island, these people became captives, and then they were hung on these masts by the pirate King Ashrod's men. This was not only to establish his power, but also to provoke Soren. "Your Excellency, throat cutter." When he saw the corpses of his men hanging on the masts one by one for the seabirds to eat, Scarface's expression became agitated again. His face was ferocious and distorted, and his eyes were bloodshot. He looked like he was about to eat someone. Soren patted him on the shoulder to comfort him and then said in a deep voice, "Send a team to bury the corpses. We will make them pay. Set sail. Let's go to Port Tylon." Just as Soren was about to lead the fleet to Port Tylon, a strange whimper suddenly came from the bottom of the sea nearby. Soren seemed to have felt something. As if something was calling him, he immediately waved his hand to signal the others to stop, and then jumped into the sea with a plop. There were many things under the blue sea. Because of the battle, the wreckage of many sunken ships could be seen at the bottom of the sea, but the thing that called Soren was deep in the sea, and that feeling was a little familiar. It's him. Soren finally saw the creature that called him. It was the mutant killer whale that he had subdued. Part of its body had rotted, and there were dense wounds on its abdomen. The rotten flesh attracted many sea creatures, and there was even a spear inserted near its chest. With such injuries it should have died long ago. Soren noticed that a large chunk of flesh had been sliced off from the side of its body. He wasn't sure if it was due to its mutation or something else, but it still retained an amazing recovery ability. Even though most of its wounds had decayed, it still maintained a weak life force. Many ships sank near it, including medium-sized warships. It was obvious that the pirate King Ashrod had paid a high price to deal with it. It was not easy to kill such a sea monster in the sea. As Soren got closer, the calling became weaker. Most of the killer whale's body had sunk into the sand. Its body was covered with various marine parasites, some of which had even drilled into its flesh. This kind of injury was too serious. It was basically impossible to save it unless there was a high-level priest casting restoration. Soren quickly approached the killer whale. He pulled out his scimitar and cut off the arrow. Then he gritted his teeth and pulled out the spear near its chest. Then he took out several bottles of healing potions and poured them into its mouth. The effect of the healing potions was too weak. As a mutant sea creature, the killer whale had quite an amazing vitality. In turn, the amount of recovery needed to treat it was even more amazing. Damn it! As Soren pulled out the deadly spear, a large amount of blood gushed out, and the mutant killer whale's breath became weaker and weaker. Without a high-level priest, no one could do anything about this kind of injury. It had been holding on for a long time. In this case, there was no way to heal it. Even with its huge body, Soren could not transport it back to Port Tylon, because a little violent movement could kill it. Damned Asrid. Soren's eyes were filled with murderous intent. He slowly pulled out his scimitar and walked in front of the mutant killer whale with a blank face. The world under the sea was very dark, and icing death glowed slightly because of the cold temperature. Soren squatted down and stroked its head, then slowly said, "Rest in peace." Such an injury. It was torture to let it hold on all the time. It was better to give it relief now. Clang. Soren's scimitar was raised, but it did not fall. Instead, it stayed 10 centimeters above. Because a row of messages appeared in front of his eyes. Divinity activated. The target creature's attitude towards you is fanatical, loyal, triggering the condition of Divinity Gift, automatically mastering a new ability, Divinity Gift. Minor Divinity activated. Part of the Divinized Data Attribute Conversion. Target has no divinity. Divinity data conversion failed. A strange data prompt appeared. Soren stopped his scimitar in an instant, and at the same time opened the data page to check the strange information that suddenly appeared. Divinity Gift, Gifted Ability. You can give a part of your divinity to a target, which can greatly strengthen the target's strength and turn it into a divine creature. After completing the divinity gift, the target creature will have a certain spiritual connection with you. The effect is at least equivalent to suggestion. At the same time, you will be able to influence and even control the target's will. In the case of the divinity gift, you can use the target as a temporary host, as your holy incarnation in the mortal world. Required divine form. Note, because you are not in the divine form, you can only give divinity to the target that fanatically worships you. Divinity? Soren's expression was a little shocked, and then he seemed to have thought of something, and his face showed a thoughtful expression. Chosen? Holy One? Soren glanced at the dying mutant killer whale in front of him. His expression was a little hesitant, but then he pressed his hand on its head. Divinity was a very powerful force. The gods could give part of their divine power and divinity to their believers. These people who had the power of the gods were the legendary chosen ones and holy ones. This kind of bestowment did not necessarily need to be done among the believers, because Gloria's mother could suddenly become a legendary because she received the divinity gift from the succubus queen. This was a very overbearing ability. Because once the power from the gods was accepted, it was equivalent to being branded. This could be seen from the Sons of Fear because they did not actively receive the divinity gift, but the will of the Dread Lord had a great impact on them. If they actively received the gift of divinity, then the final result was very likely to be turned into a fanatic of the gods. Divinity gift. A strange light appeared in Soren's eyes, and there were some traces of distortion in the space around him. His whole person seemed to be shrouded in the power of divinity, and he looked like a god overlooking the mortal world. As his palm pressed on the mutant killer whale's body, a trace of divine power penetrated its body and soul, and then Soren had a weak telepathic connection. It felt like a spiritual transmission, and he could switch his consciousness to the mutant killer whale in front of him at any time. Even if he wanted to, he could temporarily use its vision. The saint is the eye of the gods. As Soren injected 1 point of divinity into the mutant killer whale in front of him, amazing changes began to appear. Its weak heartbeat gradually became strong, and its already decaying body glowed with amazing vitality. Some of the injuries began to regenerate. The mutant killer whale, which had already entered a state of near death, struggled to swim up, and then opened its mouth to swallow a piece of marine life nearby that was attracted by its flesh and blood. 1 point of divinity. The Swamp King probably only had 1 or 2 points of divinity on him. Soren had fought so many times, and the divinity he accumulated was only 12 points. As he gave 1 point of divinity to the mutant killer whale in front of him, the divinity he had was reduced to 11 points. However, the effect of this 1 point of divinity was quite huge. The mutant killer whale's appetite was awakened, and it ate the fish in the nearby sea area crazily. At the same time, through the spiritual control produced by Soren's divinity, it expressed a kind of joy like a new life. As a kind of non-intelligent creature, the resistance of the mutant killer whale after receiving divinity was quite weak. Soren could even control its consciousness. The mutant killer whale ate crazily. Its huge body swam like a shadow on the bottom of the sea, and at the same time, it opened its bloody mouth and swallowed a large number of fish. The gift of divinity was like injecting a qualitative factor into the quantitative change. Soren could feel that this mutant killer whale was evolving little by little in the direction of a sea monster. As a divine creature, it directly jumped the threshold of mutation, and now it only needed to accumulate numbers. This time it might take several days to eat. Soren could feel the crazy hunger in its heart. 1 point of divinity had already changed its nature. Before it mutated into a sea monster, this hunger would shroud it. A figure emerged from the bottom of the sea. Soren gently jumped onto the deck of the Dragonhead warship. He glanced at the huge shadow on the bottom of the sea and said in a deep voice, "Let's go to Port Tylon." 1 point of divinity completely changed the fate of the mutant killer whale. At the same time, it also allowed Soren to touch a more mysterious realm, which belonged to the realm of the gods. Although he had a weak divinity, he could not give divine power like the gods, but he could, like the higher demons in the abyss and the Bator Inferno, give a part of his own divinity to the target, and then influence or even control the target's will. P.S. The next chapter ends this volume. Chapter 355. Following Soren's departure from Snake Island, the huge shadow on the seabed also moved towards the deep sea. 1 point of divinity allowed the mutated tiger shark's soul to sublimate. As it devoured more and more flesh, the injuries on the mutated tiger shark's body also quickly recovered. Divinity was a power that surpassed the mortal world. It was even more powerful than mutated magical creatures. When divinity was accumulated to a certain degree, it could turn a creature into a god, or it could turn them into even more terrifying abominations. The divinity that Soren bestowed upon it naturally didn't originate from the power of light, justice, or kindness. In fact, from the moment he bestowed it with divinity, the mutated tiger shark was shrouded in a desire to kill. It devoured countless sea creatures along the way. The mutated tiger shark's injuries had already mostly recovered. Its rotting flesh was gradually regenerating, and its metabolism was progressing at an astonishing speed. As it devoured more and more flesh, its body even surpassed the size of the blue whale. Moreover, as its body grew larger and larger, the mutated tiger shark's back began to grow malevolent and sharp-boned spurs. Its incomparably sharp fangs began to regenerate, and on its skin that originally belonged to a mammal, dark green scales began to grow. The scales were about the size of an adult's palm. It no longer looked like a shark but more like some kind of terrifying mutated sea monster. The crazy eating satisfied its desire for flesh, but the thirst for slaughter still tormented its soul. The mutated tiger shark finally stopped eating. Its body had completely surpassed the blue whale's, and its weight was perhaps twice that of an adult blue whale. The incomparably huge mutated tiger shark's appearance had completely changed. Its body was covered in scales and its back was full of bone spurs. Its bloody mouth had no less than 5 rows of incomparably sharp fangs, enough to easily cut any creature into pieces. It gradually approached the deep sea, and its incomparably sharp ability to detect fresh blood allowed it to discover a new target. The mutated tiger shark swam its huge body forward at high speed. Unknowingly, its pupils had already turned slightly red. It looked a little similar to Soren when he transformed into a slaughterer. Finally, it discovered a new target. It was a huge deep-sea squid. This deep-sea squid was hunting a whale which was similar to a humpback whale. The size of the adult whale had no advantage in front of this huge sea monster. It was tightly entangled in the sea by its strong tentacles. The deep-sea squid had incomparably sharp mouthparts. It was unknown how long the sea monster had existed, but when it discovered the approach of the mutant tiger shark, it very vigilantly let go of its prey, and then retracted its incomparably huge hands. The battle broke out soundlessly. The mutated tiger shark did not hesitate at all. It rushed forward like a sharp sword, opening its bloody mouth to bite the enemy in front of it. Blood gushed out from the wound. The battle between the two ocean beasts had stirred up waves in the sea, and large patches of blood had gradually dyed the seawater red. Port Tylon. Soren's fleet was docked at Port Tylon. But when Soren approached Port Tylon, a row of data appeared in front of his eyes. It was an inexplicable data: killed squid, sea creature. Divinity of slaughter energy conversion. Extracting part of soul energy. You've gained 1050 slaughter EXP. It was a very strange prompt. This sudden data prompt made Soren a little confused, and the sudden gain of slaughter EXP made him completely confused. He did not do anything special during this period of time. In addition to giving the mutated tiger shark 1 divinity point, Soren spent the rest of his time learning spells. So this sudden slaughter EXP was most likely related to the mutated tiger shark. Because it was hunting and eating, if it killed the target, then things would be a little interesting. Divinity of slaughter. If the mutated tiger shark killed the target, Soren could also get a part of the slaughter EXP. Then, he had inadvertently touched upon an even more wonderful divine domain. This reminded him of the priesthood of war. Whenever there was a large-scale war in the world, any god who had the priesthood of war and the divine domain of war would have their divine power increased. In order to strengthen their divine power and priesthoods, some evil gods with the priesthoods of war would deliberately instigate wars to expand their territory. Slaughter. This was a very scary domain. Because since ancient times, as long as one had a part of the divine domain of this domain, they were basically gods with great divine power. Soren did not know the reason. But he knew that the divine domain of slaughter, soul, and death could increase the soul energy obtained after killing the target. So the sudden slaughter EXP prompt at this moment was most likely related to the mutated tiger shark, and it was triggered by the 1 point of divinity he gave. Because Soren's divinity was the divinity of slaughter, not the divinity of fear that Vivian had. Your Excellency, throat cutter. The half-elf first mate's figure appeared near the port. He had blood stains on his body. After coming to Soren, he bowed slightly and said, "The eastern route has been blocked. Ashrad's people were all wiped out by us and some of them were captured. Now in the entire south coast area, all ships from the eastern route can't enter the south coast area." Very good. Soren nodded gently. He glanced at the others in front of him and said in a deep voice, "What about the people of the Sea Temple?" The half-elf first mate's face stiffened and whispered, "The Naga Siren priest said that this time we have to do it ourselves." The pirate king Ashrad has not publicly betrayed the Sea Temple. She doesn't want to turn things into an internal struggle of the Sea Temple. So this time it can only be regarded as a battle between the pirate kings, but she said that she will contain the power of the Naga Siren royal family and ensure that no Naga Siren will intervene in this battle. Soren's face instantly turned pale when he heard this and he shouted angrily, "This bitch!" She was the first one who wanted to deal with the pirate king Ashrod. Now that Soren had started a full-scale war, this bitch actually said that she didn't want it to become an internal struggle of the Sea Temple. What was the use of containing the Naga Siren? Did the Naga Siren dare to openly betray the sea goddess? In the end, she still wanted to preserve her strength so that Soren and Ashrod would both suffer. This son of AB** Tisich forgets justice at the sight of profit. From the beginning to the end, except for a ghost ship, she basically didn't show any real cards. What's the movement of the Principality of Rossard? Soren frowned deeply and glanced at the half-elf first mate. The Duke of Red Dragon's wife is in charge of a principality and she can't act rashly. Did you find out her whereabouts? The half-elf first mate shook his head and said, "I'm incompetent. I only found out that the navy of the Principality of Rossard was dispatched to Raging Sand Island. There is a city built by Ashrod there, and I'm afraid they plan to fight us there." Soren was silent when he heard this. He expected the Sea Temple to be sneaky. After all, he was growing too fast and there was also the Temple of Wealth. The Naga Siren priest was too scheming and narrow-minded. It was normal for her to be afraid of his strength and want to consume his strength. However, when he heard the news, his heart was still full of anger, and his dissatisfaction with the Naga Siren priest became stronger and stronger. She clearly stood behind the sea goddess and the sea temple, but she had always been afraid of Soren's strength and could not suppress it. It seemed that she was not a long-term partner. What about the captives? Soren took a deep breath and turned to look at the warships docked in Port Tylon. He said in a deep voice, "Even if the Sea Temple doesn't fight, we can still defeat Ashrod. Bring all the captives up." The half-elf first mate retreated. Soon rows of captives were pressed up. Since Ashrod attacked Snake Island, Soren naturally needed to pay him back. He directly pulled out all his strongholds on the south coast. "Throat cutter. You're dead." A pirate captive whose face was burned by fire saw him and immediately laughed and scolded, "Ashrod will hang your head on the flagpole. You're all going to die." Plop. The elite pirate escorting the captives directly punched him to shut his mouth, and then the half-elf first mate quickly explained, "He's Ashrod's half-brother. We caught him alive when we attacked the stronghold." "Half-brother? Looks like he's a human?" Soren walked in front of the captive expressionlessly and whispered, "I won't be the one to die. I'll send him to hell soon." Chow. A streak of cold saber light flashed. Then a head fell to the ground, a large amount of blood gushed out, and the headless body fell down. Soren's expression was cold. He didn't look at the headless body under his feet, and then he waved his sword again and cut off the head of the second captive. One by one heads fell to the ground and rolled around. Blood had dyed the dock red, but Soren's footsteps still didn't stop. He harvested the heads expressionlessly until the last captive died under his sword. There were a total of 127 captives. All of them were beheaded by Soren on the spot, and no one was left alive. Port Tylon was shrouded in a strong smell of blood, and heads were piled up in the center of the port. I'm afraid before the end of the battle, these heads would always be piled up here, making anyone with bad intentions think twice. Because as long as Soren didn't completely fail, they had to consider the price of rebellion. The price would be very heavy. It was also on this day. People's name for Soren gradually changed from throat cutter to beheader. P.S. Volume 2 has finally been written. I'll start writing Volume 3 in the afternoon. After finishing this volume, it'll be much easier to write. Chapter 356. P.S. Look at the exclusive story behind Lord of the Abyss. Listen to more of your suggestions for the novel. Pay attention to the Chinese network's public account. Add friends on WeChat. Add public account. Type Dread. And tell me quietly. P.S. Fixed a mistake, it's a mutant killer whale, not a mutant tiger shark. Port Tylon. More than 100 heads were simply pickled with lime, and then neatly piled up into a statue, placed in the center of the port. With the arrival of the decisive battle between the two pirate kings, the trade of the entire south coast was temporarily suspended. Cargo ships were docked at the port, and they did not dare to go out to sea at this time, for fear of being affected by the battle between the pirate kings. War is always the most destructive thing, and the war during the turbulent period completely destroyed the prosperity of the current mainland. Warships approached Port Tylon one after another. When the fleets from Shipwreck Bay, the outer islands, and Port Tylon gathered, people were surprised to find that Sorin the Decapitator had unknowingly owned hundreds of warships, enough to rival the naval forces of a kingdom. The warships gradually approached the shore. Then a group of fully armed and ferocious pirates gathered. They came from many places. There were pirate leaders of large forces and pirate leaders of small forces. They came more because of their fear of Sorin and their confidence in his victory. Because Sorin defeated the Swamp King, because he controlled the dragon warship, Dragonhead, because he conquered a northern witch, and because he also had a ghost ship in the legends, and so on, even the active pirates near the City of Wealth came to seek refuge. The actions of the Church of Wealth could not be hidden from these local snakes. They coveted the wealth of the eastern route, which was a bigger cake than the outer islands. Goods from the east, no matter what it was, were several times the profit. The pirate king Ashrod firmly controlled the eastern route, and they had no chance to intervene. But as long as they helped Sorin defeat the pirate king Ashrod, the eastern route would definitely be divided into a batch of profits. South Coast. The real value of the outer islands was the mines occupied by the indigenous people. If these mines could not be taken from the indigenous tribes, then the value of the outer islands was only 1/3 of the eastern route. The only troublesome thing was that the eastern route was more dangerous and it took longer to go back and forth. Sir. The half-elf first mate appeared in front of Sorin and said in a deep voice, 121 warships have responded to the call, and there are a total of 3,215 pirates who can fight. There are still some pirate leaders on the way, and it will take them a day or two to arrive. Sorin was the pirate king. He was equivalent to the head of the Forest Alliance. If they didn't respond to his summons under such circumstances, they would be punished after the war. This was the right of the pirate king. Even if they weren't Sorin's direct subordinates, the pirates that were active in the south coast had to listen to his orders. I can't wait that long. Sorin stood on the deck of the dragon-headed warship, looking into the distance and said in a deep voice, we can't wait that long. We will set off tomorrow to attack Raging Sand Island. Yes. The half-elf first mate said with a solemn expression. That night, Port Tylon was completely different from the past. There were no more playful crowds on the streets and the taverns were quiet. People spoke in low voices. The sheriff in charge of Port Tylon was a little frightened. He doubled the patrol guards to the previous level, and even went to the Sea Temple to visit the Naga Siren priest. Because Sorin had gathered too many people, so many pirates were enough to attack Port Tylon. If there was trouble, the consequences would be quite serious. The natives of Port Tylon closed their doors, and there were no idle people on the road. Only the port area was brightly lit until dawn. Teams of strong pirates could be seen transporting weapons and materials to the warships. Heavy cannons, boxes of gunpowder, and the smell of war enveloped the island city. The next day, the person Sorin was waiting for arrived. It was a gift prepared for him by Gloria. With the emergence of a portal, a northern witch of about 40 years old with a stiff face appeared. Behind her stood 2 other young northern witches. Your Excellency Sorin? The middle-aged witch with a stiff face glanced at Sorin and nodded slightly. Counselor Gloria used the A-level authority to apply for the right to transfer any A-level strategic materials of the Northern Witch Council. This is the strategic material she applied for. Please accept it yourself. Sorin just nodded, and the middle-aged witch with a stiff face cast a spell to open a portal. Then the space in front of them was linked to the interior of a wizard tower. The portal only lasted for a short period of time, so they couldn't see what was inside, but they could feel that it was a very majestic laboratory. Then 2 incomparably tall steel golems appeared and carried out something that looked a bit like a mortar but only had a similar appearance. Superconducting Arcane Crystal Pulse Cannon Experimental Model IS-1. The middle-aged witch with a stiff face looked at Sorin with a serious expression and said in a deep voice, the superconducting Arcane Crystal Pulse Cannon has been charged, but please note that it can only fire 1 energy pulse attack. The Superconducting Arcane Crystal Pulse Cannon Experimental Model I-1 is an A-level strategic material of the Witch Council. As an experimental model, it can carry out a long-range energy pulse attack with an effective range of 120 kilometers and an actual range of 50 kilometers. Because there is no wizard tower to operate as a hub, I suggest that you attack within 30 kilometers. Counselor Gloria applied for the right to use it. The superconducting arcane crystal pulse cannon is still the property of the Witch Council. If there is any damage, you will compensate the Witch Council 3.6 million Kindler. The middle-aged witch with a stiff face took out a document engraved with magewebs and handed it to Soren. She said in a deep voice, "These two steel golems are responsible for protecting the superconducting arcane crystal pulse cannon experimental model I-1. At the same time, they will operate it to attack according to your orders. Please pay attention. This weapon must be protected. It is one of the only remaining experimental products of the Witch Council. If there is any damage, Counselor Gloria's authority will also be punished." Soren nodded silently, then took out a ring that looked like a coat of arms and pressed it gently on the document. The light of a spell appeared. The middle-aged witch pointed to the dragon-headed warship, and the two steel golems carried the superconducting arcane crystal pulse cannon onto the deck. This weapon looked a bit like a mortar. It was a little different from the one Soren had seen in the half-elven city. It seemed to be an imitation of the Witch Council. The curve of the barrel was quite smooth, and the slender barrel did not have an opening. The trajectory was 3 interlaced runes, and at the end, there was a purple gemstone that looked like a steeple. This was not a traditional alchemy gunpowder weapon, but an energy weapon from the Arcane Empire. To be honest, Soren was not sure how powerful it was, but it certainly would not let him down, because it had a strong sense of science fiction in the interstellar era. The base of the superconducting arcane crystal pulse cannon was a square alchemy structure, a bit like the transformation device of the golems. After it was transported onto the deck, it automatically extended a bracket to fix it. The barrel was only the size of an adult's arm, and the whole body was shiny silver white. Soren reached out and touched it slightly, and found that it was infiltrated with a large amount of mithril. Only mithril could withstand such a large amount of energy without blocking the transmission of energy. The alchemy device from the Arcane Empire, with Soren's current knowledge, he could not understand it at all. But he felt that this weapon was not too far away from the electromagnetic pulse cannon of the interstellar era. It was purely an intuition. He was still full of respect for the arcane civilization that could send a city into the sky and transform it into a floating city. Signing completed. The middle-aged witch with a stiff face looked at him and said in a deep voice, "Mr. Soren, please take good care of it. After the energy is fired, we will automatically track the space coordinates and take it back." After that, she directly opened a directional portal and left with the two young witches behind her. "Let's go." Soren glanced at the others, and then ordered his men to cover it up, leaving only 2 steel golems to guard the superconducting arcane crystal pulse cannon. He stood on the high platform of the dragon-headed warship, looking down at the others and said, "Go to Raging Sand Island." Woo woo woo. The bleak sound of a horn sounded. As the dragon-headed warship took the lead to leave the port, the warships docked nearby all set sail. More than 100 pirate ships sailed into the sea, heading toward Raging Sand Island, which was occupied by Ashrod. Pirate flags fluttered in the wind. Pirate warships of different shapes formed a fleet, moving along the eastern route. They would enter Ashrod's territory in a day. In the deep sea area invisible to the naked eye, a broken ghost ship was also slowly moving forward. The undead bound on the ship were working expressionlessly. Only when there were marine creatures nearby, their faces showed a trace of thirst for blood and slaughter. Ghost ship, the dead man's voice. It was hungry. As a ghost ship with a life of its own, it had been cast by a legendary master to animate life. It fed on death, flesh and souls. However, ever since the battle with the Swamp King, it had been quiet and had never had the chance to taste blood and slaughter. As an animate life, it had no wisdom, but it had the instinct of a creature. It longed for death. In another deeper part of the sea, as if it was aware of the call from somewhere, a huge shadow rose from the bottom of the sea. The first thing that appeared was a bone spur as thick as an adult's arm on its back, sharp like a javelin. This huge shadow floated to the surface of the sea, stayed in place for a moment, and then moved toward a direction at high speed. The master was summoning it. This is a good activity where a pie falls from the sky. Cool phones are waiting for you. Click on the Chinese network's official account, add friends on WeChat, add a public account, type KDRED, and participate now. Everyone has a prize. Follow the official account of KDRED on WeChat. Chapter 357. P.S. Read the exclusive story behind Lord of the Abyss, and listen to more suggestions for the novel. Pay attention to the Chinese website's official account, add friends on WeChat, add official account, type Dread, and tell me secretly. Raging Sand Island. This was the largest island within a radius of 500 kilometers. It was surrounded by golden beaches and a dense forest in the center. The city built by the pirate king Ashrad was here. Originally there were many indigenous people here, a bit like the Ryukyu kingdom. However, after Ashrad unified the Eastern Sea route, it became a pirate's base camp. Compared to Soren's rule under the cruel law, the pirate king Ashrad's management was much more chaotic. As long as there was no rebellion, he rarely intervened. Therefore, the number of indigenous people near Raging Sand Island became fewer and fewer. In the end, only pirates were left in the city. A city with only pirates was not lively. This was the largest place to sell stolen goods on the Eastern Sea route. Ashrad dared to accept anything that could make money. Rumor had it that this place even dared to touch some forbidden areas, and there were cases of people eating each other. Unlike the outer islands, which took at least a month to go back and forth, no news could be blocked for too long. However, the Eastern Sea route took a long time, and the possibility of encountering a storm monster was very high. If it weren't for the fact that there were too many missing people, Ashrad wouldn't have been suspected. Soren's fleet approached the overseas city. He stood on the observatory with a monocular and looked at the port and warships in front of him. He saw pirate ships with flags and naval warships from the Principality of Rossard. What made him a little uneasy was that Soren found some strange warships. Eastern warships. Most of the warships of the Eastern pirates were fast ships. Soren had seen such warships in the past, near the port near the Desert of Death. That was the territory of the Eastern pirates. They and the desert bandits controlled the sea and land trade respectively. These bandits had the support of nobles behind them, and even the Eastern pirates had the backing of a rather powerful monastery. Eastern monks. Monks were not professions like paladins. There was no lack of lawful evil among them. It's the Eastern pirates. Soren descended from the observation deck and glanced at the fallen witch beside him. He then said in a deep voice, Ashrad has been operating the Eastern Sea route for many years. I'm not surprised that he's able to rope in the Eastern pirates. No wonder he suddenly dared to fight me head-on. It turns out that other than the Principality of Rossard, there's another group of helpers. The Principality of Rossard's strongest troops were the heavy infantry. The navy is their weak point. In fact, because of the existence of the Sea Church, there are not many powerful navies on the entire south coast. Pirates from the east? Fallen Witch Karina looked into the distance and whispered, those monks are not easy to deal with. Soren nodded. I know. When the Raging Sand Island appeared in front of Soren, the warship on the other side also noticed them. With the appearance of a large battleship with a Naga Siren's ram, the other battleships also gathered towards it. Astrid's warships were actually more than Soren's. The Principality of Rossard's navy sent out dozens of warships, as well as the pirate warships under his command and the pirate ships from the east. The number was probably close to double that of Soren's, but Soren only brought medium-sized warships, while the other side was mixed with some small fast ships. I didn't find the Duke of Red Dragon's wife. Fallen Witch's palm appeared with a magic aura, and then it turned into a pair of white eyes. This was the wizard's clairvoyance, an observation spell. Brother. Let Vivian deal with them. The little girl seemed quite excited today. She looked forward eagerly and said, it's just a group of big wood. Vivian can kill a lot of them by herself. Soren put his hand on her shoulder and said in a deep voice, don't underestimate the enemy. There must be spellcasters on the other side. The Duke of Red Dragon's wife came from an ancient sorcerer family. If he dares to declare war on us, he must have some confidence. Hundreds of warships were facing each other in the vast sea. The pirates gathered together. The coming war made many people feel a little nervous. It could be said that such a large-scale naval battle had rarely happened in the past 100 years. Soren didn't know much about naval warfare. But as a top rogue he had a keen sense of observation. At a glance, he could see that the fleet on the other side was divided into three parts. First, the Principality of Rossard's navy was in a battle formation. They were a regular naval fleet and must have been trained accordingly. Then there was the pirate King Asrad's fleet. These warships were like Soren's men. They could barely gather together to protect the two wings and couldn't form any formation at all. It was estimated that the pirate King Asrad usually commanded a dozen warships at most. Now that there were hundreds of warships, he couldn't command them at all. He also had a mix of people from different places. Finally, there were the Eastern pirates' warships. They numbered about 10 and all of them were medium-sized ships. Their positions were not very close, and it seemed that they didn't intend to fight to the death for Astrid. The core of Soren's fleet was only 16 warships. The Dragonhead warship, the half-elf first mate, the red-haired female pirate Adele Isabella, Cyclops, Scarface, Giant, Butler, Knight and so on. These pirate leaders each led their own warships in formation, surrounded by the pirate leaders under their command. Without military training, Soren could only let his men spread out to command them. Otherwise there would be no way to command them when the battle broke out. Naval warfare was not like marching on land. These pirates would easily fight for themselves after the battle. Woo woo woo. The strange sound of a conch suddenly came from afar. Soren's face suddenly changed slightly and shouted, "Be careful! There's movement under the sea." A black shadow appeared from the bottom of the sea. Then a medium-sized ship on the side of Soren's fleet trembled. The next moment, it suddenly turned over and sank to the bottom of the sea. In an instant, the others finally saw the silhouette of the black shadow. It was a huge sea snake with 3 heads. A medium-sized warship was like a toy in front of it. In the blink of an eye, the warship was overturned and sunk into the sea. "Let me deal with it." Fallen which Kalina frowned. She seemed to notice that the morale of her side was a little low for a moment. She said in a deep voice, "It's a sea monster. I'm afraid it's a 3-headed dragon." Soren reached out to stop her. He frowned and looked at the front. He said in a deep voice, "No need. Damn Naga priestess. Didn't she say that the Naga sirens wouldn't get involved in this battle? In the entire sea domain besides the Naga sirens, who else could control a sea monster of the Naga sirens?" This bitch's words were getting more and more untrustworthy. Boom. Just as the 3-headed sea serpent overturned one of Soren's warships, the pirate fleet on the opposite side also launched an attack. The sailors began to load ammunition, and the burly pirate commandos were ready to fight when they got close. Soren's warships were attacking from the front. The navy of the Principality of Rossard and the Eastern Pirates' warships surrounded him from the side. They planned to eat Soren like dumplings. Greed is like a snake trying to swallow an elephant. Soren snorted coldly and opened his mouth to make a silent roar. With his call, a huge shadow appeared from the side of the enemy. A mutant killer whale. No no no. It should be the sea monster, Hakas now. After receiving a divinity point from Soren, the mutant killer whale had exceeded the size of the blue whale. It was nearly 50 meters long and weighed more than 300 tons. There were bony spikes on its back that were as sharp as javelins. The scales on its body strengthened its defense and allowed it to withstand greater impact. It rushed into the enemy's right flank like a ferocious monster and sank a warship in an instant. At the same time, it set off huge waves that hit the nearby pirate ships. In front of the sea monster, these warships were too small. Cheers sounded. The low morale suddenly recovered because compared to the 3-headed sea serpent lurking at the bottom of the sea, the mutant killer whale was more oppressive. Rumble. A burst of gunfire sounded. Soren turned his gaze to the half-elf first mate behind him and said in a deep voice, "I'll leave it to you to command." After that, his figure flew out and ran at high speed on the sea as if he was running on flat ground. Walking on water. Under the effect of haste, Soren could finally do this. Rumble. In the middle of the battlefield, the seawater on all sides suddenly separated to the left and right, and then a black mast appeared. Then its ghost ship. Deadman's voice broke through the surface of the sea and appeared in the air. The ferocious undead turned their cannons and aimed at the pirate warships on both sides. The next moment, the cannons fired and sank the 2 enemy warships in an instant. The dragon-headed warship was in the middle. What really possessed the most destructive power was the quasi-legendary Spectre. Heavy Boomerang. Soren pointed his curved sword, and the sea spirits behind him turned their bow cannons. 2 heavy boomerang cannons fired instantly and sank an armed ship equipped with 36 cannons. Animated life, undead characteristic. Just when Soren sank 2 warships in a row, the enemy also aimed their cannons at the ghost ship. However, no one needed to steer. Under the will of Soren, the ghost ship automatically changed its sails, and then summoned a fog on the sea and escaped into the fog at an amazing speed. Behind them was the sound of gunfire and the excited howls of the wraiths after getting satisfaction from killing. This ship was alive and could sail automatically according to the will of its master. Get ready for battle. Soren looked at the undead behind him. These undead lives bound to the ghost ship showed a grim smile on their faces. then waved their heavy weapons and prepared to land on the enemy's warships in the fog. They were immortal undead. As long as the dead man's voice didn't sink, they would never truly die because their souls were one with the dead man's voice. Animated ropes. In the fog, the dead man's voice quietly approached a battleship. In an instant, the ropes all over the ship were like flying snakes. They automatically entangled the battleship next to them as if they were alive. The tough ropes swept out like poisonous snakes, strangling the enemies on the deck and then hanging them up. Swoosh. Soren took out the elven war bow and instantly shot an enemy who was hung up by the animated ropes. The next moment, the ropes were quickly loosened and then wrapped around another enemy. The battle had just begun. This is a good activity where a pie falls from the sky. Cool phones are waiting for you. Click on the Chinese network's official account, add friends on WeChat, add a public account, type Dread, and participate now. Everyone has a prize. Now follow the official account of Dread on WeChat. Chapter 358. P.S. Read the exclusive story behind Lord of the Abyss, and listen to your suggestions for the novel. Pay attention to the Chinese website's official account, add friends on WeChat, add official account, type Dread, and tell me secretly. Naval battles were not easy. Even for powerful spellcasters, this kind of battle environment also made them feel helpless. When Soren controlled the ghost ship, Dead Man's voice to kill the pirates, the enemy's spellcasting also locked onto his position. The fog slightly blocked their vision, but for powerful spellcasters, it was not difficult to find him. But then a problem appeared. If they wanted to attack Soren, they had to close the distance. The firepower of the 24 cannons was quite fierce, and there was also a mutant killer whale nearby. It was basically difficult for other warships to get close. Most of the spellcasters had flying spells, but if they flew over, it meant that the target was exposed. At the same time, they also needed the support of flying spellcasting. Vivian, who had already landed on the ghost ship, smiled sweetly. The little girl was wearing a black princess dress. She raised her hand and threw out a dispel spell. What? The sound of falling into the water came from the front. With Vivian's legendary spellcasting level, the dispel spell she threw out could crush these spellcasters. The flying spell was dispelled, and the spellcasters who were just about to attack Soren all fell into the sea. What awaited them below was a bloody mouth. Under the situation of falling at high speed, even Soren found it difficult to cast spells. Under their feet was not flat ground but an endless sea. No matter how noble a spellcaster was, if they did not cast spells they would just swim in the sea. Vivian would not give them a chance to cast spells. In fact, if it was not for the Duke of Red Dragon's wife who had not yet appeared, the little girl who was eager to try would have already started a massacre. A bunch of trash. Standing on the sea demon warship, Ashrod flew into a rage and roared, "A specter ship is enough to make you lose your footing. In the cannons. All of you aim at it. Sink it." Cannons were aimed at the position of the ghost ship. Under the command of the pirate king Ashrod, the enemy, who had been slightly alarmed by the appearance of the ghost ship, reacted. Then hundreds of cannons nearby all aimed at the ghost ship. He actually wanted to use the firepower to directly sink Soren's dead man's voice. Under the attack of hundreds of cannons, even if the specter ship could automatically change its direction, it would not be able to avoid such a dense net of firepower. Boom, 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 boom. The dull sound of cannon fire shook the sky. The intersecting firepower on both sides covered almost all the escape routes of the ghost ship. No matter how it changed its sailing position, at least a dozen cannons would hit the hull. Ghost dive. Soren's expression remained calm. He stared ahead and ordered, "Dive to the bottom of the sea." The dark hull of the ship began to sink. The ghost ship gradually sank to the bottom of the sea, and the water surged in from all sides. The undead who were killing on the other pirate ships all jumped into the sea, and then swam to the deck of the ghost ship. The fog became a little thinner. After 5 minutes of intensive firepower, the pirate king Ashrod saw nothing in front of him. There was only the sea covered by fog and no ship wreckage was seen. There were many bodies floating on the calm sea, but all of them were his men. His face was quite pale at the moment. The ghost ship itself was a very terrible existence in the sea. Now that this terrible existence was controlled by a person, its combat power was even more amazing. The battlefield on the opposite side was also much quieter. Soren's men were not sure about the situation just now. They only saw the cannons aiming at the ghost ship. They were not sure whether the ghost ship had been sunk or whether Soren had died under such intensive firepower. After all, even a legendary profession might not be able to withstand intensive gunfire. Boom. The sea on the side suddenly separated. The pirate King Ashrod's face suddenly changed and he roared, "Attack!" Ta, ta. Boom. Boom. Two heavy cannons responded to them. A dark mast rose from the side of the sea, and the ghost ship, Dead Man's Voice, appeared on the sea again. With its appearance, the surrounding fog became thicker again. The ghost ship's figure escaped into the fog, and only a blurry shadow could be seen. It was difficult to determine its specific position without closing the distance. Damn it! The pirate King Ashrod's face was quite ugly. He shouted to a man dressed as an officer next to him, "Where is the Duke of Red Dragon's wife? Where is the support I asked for? Hurry up and let them sink this ghost ship." The officer had been watching the changes on the battlefield with a blank expression. He noticed that the pirates on the flank of Soren's camp had signs of collapse. They were no match for the navy of the Principality of Rossard. At the same time, because of the three-headed sea serpent, the originally dense formation had been loosened. In order to avoid this sea monster, many warships distanced themselves, exposing quite obvious defensive gaps in the middle. At this time, if there was a fleet like a sharp knife, it could completely cut Soren's formation. Let the eastern pirates attack. The stout officer glanced at Ashrod and then said to a warlock wearing a cloak like a woman, "That ghost ship. Can you deal with it?" A cold female voice rang out. Legendary animated life forms. The hull, sails, cannons, and the whole ship are animated ropes that bind the undead who died under its hands. This ghost ship can deal with dozens of warships. If the Duke of Red Dragon's wife doesn't do it herself, we can't deal with this ghost ship. There seems to be a very powerful spellcaster on it. The female warlock with a cold voice suddenly frowned, and then her figure rose into the air like an eagle. She said coldly, "Looks like a little girl. I'll deal with her." Boom. A pair of blood-red dragon wings spread out. The female warlock who had been hidden in the cloak revealed her true appearance. It was a beautiful young woman, at least she looked quite young. She was wearing a silver silk robe with many runes inlaid on it. She held a strange scepter in her hand, which looked more like a spiked mace. From her back was a pair of huge red dragon wings. This pair of dragon wings allowed her to fly easily, and set off gusts of wind while flying. Dragon Disciple. Dragon Wings Awakening, Innate Ability. Level 9 Dragon Disciple will further awaken the dragon's ability. At this time, they will obtain a pair of dragon wings according to the dragon's bloodline they inherited. This pair of dragon wings allows them to fly freely in the air. This ability is an innate ability. When activated in the state of transformation, it cannot be removed by any spell. The young woman flapped her dragon wings and rose into the air. Then her petite body swooped up under the action of the huge dragon wings. She raised her hand and threw out a fireball, which instantly hit the deck of the Dead Man's Voice. Dragon wings were her innate ability, so Dragon Disciple warlocks with dragon wings did not need the support of flying spellcasting because they did not need to cast two spells at the same time. "Brother, be careful." Vivian's clear childish voice sounded. The little girl narrowed her eyes and locked on the air. She said excitedly, "Madam Duke of Red Dragon, you finally appeared. Divine Power Manifestation." The little girl's figure rose into the air. As she stretched out her small white hand and clenched it, a 15-meter-long flame whip appeared in her palm out of thin air. This was a whip that was completely formed by flames. The scorching temperature burned the air, and with its appearance the surrounding temperature rose by a lot. It was as if it was radiating a scorching aura in all directions. Baylor's Whip. Spell-like ability. A tattoo-like magic pattern appeared on the side of Vivian's face, and a pair of small demon wings appeared on her back. They were still not fully grown, but it did not affect her flying ability. The little girl shouted and raised her 50-meter-long flame whip. She raised her hand and lashed out at the dragon disciple in front of her. The flame whip seemed to burn the air as it passed through. While lashing out at the enemy, it also left a trail of flames in the air. A whistling wind came. The dragon disciple in mid-air dodged and then stopped at a position nearly 100 meters high. He said coldly, "Demon Warlock? You guys really have something to do with demons." Swoosh. A sharp arrow was shot from the dead man's voice and instantly hit the dragon disciple in front of her. However, when it was 20 centimeters away from her, an invisible energy field blocked the arrow. The arrow exhausted its power and fell lightly. "Vivian, be careful." Soren's voice sounded in the little girl's mind, and he said in a deep voice, "She's not the Duke of Red Dragon's wife. The Duke of Red Dragon's wife hasn't appeared yet." In front of her was only a level 9 dragon disciple. Any dragon disciple could awaken a pair of dragon wings as long as they raised their profession level to level 9. She was not the Duke of Red Dragon's wife that Soren had seen before. The little girl heard this and temporarily put away the big move that she had prepared. She waved the flame whip and floated in midair. She looked up at the dragon disciple and snorted coldly, "Vivian is not a demon warlock. Shameful woman who doesn't wear anything down there should shut up." Her whole body stiffened. The young dragon disciple's face showed an angry expression. She didn't expect this little girl to have such good eyesight that she could even see through the energy field of her wizard robe. "Shut up." The young dragon disciple scolded, and like a real dragon she opened her mouth and spat out a scorching dragon breath. Dragon disciple versus divine warlock. Vivian chuckled and waved the flame whip. It directly absorbed the scorching dragon breath, and the flame on the Baler's whip became hotter and hotter. This is a good activity where a pie falls from the sky. Cool phones are waiting for you. Click on the Chinese network's official account, add friends on WeChat, add a public account, type Kdred, and participate now. There's a prize for everyone. Follow Kdred's official account now. Chapter 359. P.S. Look at the exclusive story behind Lord of the Abyss, listen to more suggestions for the novel, pay attention to the Chinese network's public account, add friends on WeChat, add public account, type Kdred, and tell me quietly. Ashrad. When Vivian faced the young dragon disciple, a large warship with Naga Siren armor also appeared in Soren's sight. Pirate King, Ashrad. This bastard who once betrayed Soren and let him deal with the Swamp King alone, and then sneak attacked Devil's Island to steal the fruits of victory. Soren didn't touch him for a while, but he didn't expect this guy to dare to sneak attack Snake Island. Now that he finally saw this guy, Soren's eyes suddenly showed a strong murderous intent. Brute Strength, Extreme Spell. Melf's Minute Meteor, Extreme Spell. Cat's Grace, Extreme Spell. When the outline of the Naga Siren warship appeared in front of Soren, he began to cast spells quickly. He continuously cast a set of extreme spell buffs, and then his whole body rose into the air. His toes touched the water gently, and then his whole body stepped on the water and ran at high speed on the sea. Behead. Kill Ashrad. At this moment, Soren didn't hold back at all. When he flew close to the Naga Siren warship, he roared fiercely, and his whole body made a crackling sound. Then his pupils enlarged and became bloodshot, and finally turned into a strange blood-red color. Transform into a slaughterer. Soren's figure suddenly jumped up after approaching the Naga Siren warship. The power in the transformed state was quite amazing, and the solid deck cracked directly. His figure rose into the sky like a cannonball, and a high-speed and condensed minute meteor flame appeared in his palm. After locking the position of Ashrad, he threw it directly. Boom. There was a violent explosion. A hole was blown out on the deck of the Naga warship, and one of Ashrad's followers died on the spot. Melf's Minute Meteor was equivalent to Soren's all-out attack. His figure was still in midair, and the attack was like an anti-aircraft gun. Minute meteor flames fell from the sky and landed on the helmsman of the Naga warship like a dense bombardment. Violent explosions rang out one after another. Soren fired 9 micrometeors in a row in a short span of 1 second. Relying on the astonishing agility of the Slaughterer transformation, all of them hit their target's location. A huge hole was blasted in the sturdy deck, and the corpses nearby were all smashed into pieces. The continuous explosions destroyed everything within a 5-meter radius. The Pirate King Ashrad, who had been in charge of the Eastern Sea route for many years, was blown into pieces by Soren before he could even let out a fart. In fact, when he was attacked he activated several pieces of equipment in a row, but he only blocked the attack of 3-minute meteor. Then he was drowned by the roaring minute meteor flame. Melf's Minute Meteor, which was known as the Lesser God Slaying spell, easily broke through his defensive equipment. Under hundreds of explosive burning damage, a quasi-legendary Pirate King fell. Pata. Soren's figure landed on one knee, and the flame in his palm gradually extinguished. Melf's Minute Meteor could only support less than 10 attacks. As a level 5 spell under the effect of spell maximization, it was supposed to be a continuous combat ability, but it became an explosive ability because of Soren's high-speed attack. Soren did not have many advanced spell slots left. The 3 maximal spells left him with only half of the 4th circle and 5th circle spell slots. After landing, he pulled out 2 curved swords and slashed at the enemy in front of him. Dang! Sword form, spinning strike. Soren's opponent was an expressionless middle-aged officer. He had slight burn scars on his body, and the weapon in his hand was a relatively rare rapier. He was able to block Soren's powerful moves. Damn it! The middle-aged officer glanced at the minced meat in front of him and said, "This piece of trash." He was beheaded so easily. Brr. In the face of Soren's fierce attack, he suddenly roared, and his body swelled like a barbarian. This was not a berserk ability, but another ability that Soren was not familiar with. It was more like some kind of forbidden evil. "Brother, be careful." Vivian's cry of surprise suddenly came from the sky. Then a strange red figure appeared in the sky. She descended from the sky in an arc and raised her hand to cast the immobilization spell. Hold human body spell. The Duke of Red Dragon's wife. She finally appeared at this moment, but her target was Soren in front of her. She also wanted to behead her target. When Soren successfully beheaded the pirate King Soren, she strangely appeared nearby and then locked onto Soren. A row of data appeared. You've been attacked by human hold. Test of Fortitude triggered. Test of Fortitude passed. You're immune to this spell attack. Where did she come from? Soren's perception was not weak, and the opponent's attack did not even trigger his intuition. The only explanation was that she was not nearby just now. The spiritual realm. Soren suddenly thought of something. High-grade spellcasters could let themselves enter the spiritual realm. The spiritual realm was a parallel plane to the material plane. Most people present could not see people in the spiritual realm. This was similar to the tactics of legendary rogues, because legendary rogues could also enter the shadow plane, and then directly travel from the shadow plane to the material plane. Did I pass the test of fortitude? Soren was overjoyed. In an instant he activated Evade Sight and went into stealth. Detect invisibility. The Duke of Red Dragon's wife cast spells very quickly. With a magic aura, Soren's figure appeared 10 meters away. Vivisection. Level 8 spell. With a magic aura, the Duke of Red Dragon's wife showed a cruel smile on her coquettish face. In an instant Soren's figure froze, and his mouth made a beast-like roar of pain. His skin and flesh had a strange reddish hue to it. It was as if his skin had been cut by a scalpel, and there were small blood-red scars on his skin. Command Shock. Another spell fell from the sky, and Soren's figure froze in place. However, this spell seemed to have a limited effect on Soren. He only paused for a moment and regained his freedom. What a strong vitality. The Duke of Red Dragon's wife frowned and murmured, "Demon blood? How can a rogue have the vitality of a warrior?" The shock spell was quite effective against enemies with low vitality. However, if the enemy's vitality was too strong, then the probability of passing the test was quite high. Shadow Leap. Soren couldn't attack the Duke of Red Dragon's wife who was in midair. He went directly into the shadows and then appeared on the edge of the deck. The dead man's voice was close. With a plop, his figure jumped into the sea and disappeared without a trace. I can't fight recklessly. Soren's means of attacking the air were bows and arrows. Perhaps the arrows couldn't even break the energy shield of the Duke of Red Dragon's wife. A legendary dragon disciple. With Soren's current strength, even if he transformed into slaughter, he didn't have much chance of winning. He could only barely survive. It was really her. It was another person who had been waiting for a long time. Fallen Witch, Kalina. When the figure of the Duke of Red Dragon's wife appeared, the Fallen Witch disappeared strangely. When Soren's figure fell into the sea, the Fallen Witch in a black robe appeared near the dead man's voice. She raised her hand and cast a spell towards the Duke of Red Dragon's wife. Greater Disjunction. Disintegrate. Mordenkainen's Disjunction. Legendary spellcasters had a number of defensive means. The most important thing to kill them was to break their defensive force field. Realm of Fear. Time Stop. Vivian had been waiting for her to appear for a long time. She suddenly abandoned the opponent in front of her and flashed to the Duke of Red Dragon's wife. She then cast the legendary spell Time Stop. Accident. Chain accident. When the figure of the Duke of Red Dragon's wife was frozen in mid-air, intensive triggered spells burst out like fireworks. A series of magic auras emerged one after another, and endless protective energy fields enveloped her. For a while, she didn't know how many defensive spells were triggered. Just her equipment alone had 5 or 6 magic auras. It was quite difficult to kill a legendary spellcaster. Soren was not sure whether Vivian and the Fallen Witch could break the opponent's protective force field during the duration of the spells, so in order to pursue the greatest result, he did not hesitate to give the order to attack. Legendary Dragon Disciple. Their vitality was comparable to that of a legendary warrior. They were equivalent to half a dragon. Even without any defensive spells, it was quite difficult to kill them. The base HP of a legendary Dragon Disciple was 12 points. Soren's rogue only had 6 points, the wizard had 4 points, and the shadow dancer had 8 points. Dragon Head Warship. Following the operation of the steel golem, a purple light appeared on the experimental Model I-1 of the super arcane crystal pulse cannon. Then, like an electromagnetic charge, an incomparably powerful energy converged on the silver-white barrel. The incomparably powerful energy even caused the surrounding space to slightly distort. The jumping energy arcs seemed to have layers upon layers of texture. Energy activation completed. Super Arcane Crystal Pulse Cannon Experimental Model I-1 locked on target. Fire. A purple energy light cut through the sky. The next moment, it pierced the body of the Duke of Red Dragon's wife. The highly condensed energy even passed through the field of time stop and opened a huge hole in her chest. There was no blood at all because all the blood had evaporated. But this was just the beginning. The purple energy light broke through the air and evaporated the mast of a warship. The upper part of the mast broke and fell down. The energy light spanned a distance of nearly 20 kilometers and finally hit the wall of Raging Sand Island in the distance. Rumble. There was no explosion, only the rumbling sound of collapse. The solid gate, which was nearly 10 meters thick, turned into ruins in the blink of an eye. The whole battlefield was dead silent. What a good activity for a pie in the sky. Cool mobile phones are waiting for you. Click on the Chinese network's public account, add friends on WeChat, add a public account, type Kdred, and participate now. Everyone has a prize. Follow Kdred's WeChat public account now. Chapter 360. P.S. Read the exclusive story behind Lord of the Abyss, and listen to more suggestions for the novel. Pay attention to the Chinese website's official account, add friends on WeChat, add official account, type Kdred, and tell me quietly. The purple arc of light still remained in the air. The next moment, the body of the Duke of Red Dragon's wife flew like snowflakes in the sky and turned into pure energy dissipating in the air. Not good. The scene in front of him made Soren frown. The Fallen Witch behind him also changed her expression greatly. She raised her hand and threw out a level 9 spell. Soul Trap. An invisible energy barrier shrank, and there was a faint strange whisper. This spell must be chanted with blasphemous words because it could imprison the soul of any enemy. Unfortunately, when the Fallen Witch finished casting, the body of the Duke of Red Dragon's wife had turned into energy and dissipated. Only 2 or 3 pieces of equipment fell from the air with the wind. Vivian quickly reached out and caught them, and then directly fell in front of Soren. It's life hiding. The Fallen Witch landed on the ghost ship with a complicated expression and said in a deep voice, I didn't expect a sorcerer to master this legendary spell. It seems that we still underestimated her too much. Legendary spell. The spell that just worked on the Duke of Red Dragon's wife was a top-level spell that was comparable to Time Stop. Life hiding, legendary spell. Legendary spellcasters can isolate their own vitality to a certain part of the body, then take it down and keep it in a safe place. In this way you can't be killed by any conventional means and you are immune to most paralysis, near-death and death effects. If the body is destroyed by the enemy, then a part of the preserved vitality can be resurrected through a body reconstructed by cloning. Note: life hiding can transform the body into a semi-energy state and be immune to most negative effects. Cloning, level 8 spell. Create a body copy without vitality. After death, your soul will immediately be transferred to the body with the soul imprint to be resurrected. The clone body copy needs to be cultivated in the laboratory for several months. After resurrection, your level will be reduced by 1 level. There is a certain chance of failure during the cloning process, and it requires a lot of materials to cultivate. Note: cloning requires a large alchemy laboratory. Legendary wizards were the most difficult to kill. One of the reasons was the legendary spell Life Concealment. It could isolate the life force of a legendary spellcaster in a certain location, and then take it down and store it in a safe place. This was a bit like the phylactery of a lich, but as a legendary flesh spell, Life Concealment had higher requirements. This legendary spell required a huge amount of wealth to cast, as well as a certain amount of soul energy. However, its use was also very shocking. Let alone the Fallen, which, even Soren didn't expect that a legend-ranked dragon warlock would be able to learn this spell. After all, the spells of a warlock were mostly based on their understanding. This spell was very difficult to master, and it required a lot of alchemy skills. Many legendary wizards might not be able to master this spell. The legendary mages were high and mighty. To a large extent, it was because of this spell that they could have an extra life, which made them much more relaxed than other legendary professions. And this was because the Arcane Empire had been destroyed. Otherwise, in the literature recorded by the wizards, the Arcanists also had an advanced version of Life Concealment. That was, after the death of the body, the Arcanists could directly use the preserved part of the body to resurrect. There was no need for cloning at all. In that case, the only way to kill a legendary Arcanist was to destroy their soul. The pirate king Ashrod was killed by Soren. The Duke of Red Dragon's wife was penetrated by the crystal pulse cannon, and then dissipated into the air with the wind. The enemies who were in the middle of the battle were stunned. The eastern pirates reacted the fastest. They almost didn't think too much and immediately turned around to escape the battlefield. The second to react was the navy of the Principality of Rossard. They clearly had the advantage on the flank, but under the command of the commander, they made a prompt decision to retreat from the battlefield. The last to react were the pirate king Ashrod's subordinates. They had been beaten so badly that they wanted to escape. Some of them even planned to escape to the raging sand island behind them. Victory. Soren glanced at the defeated enemy and reached out to stop Vivian, who was ready to chase after them. He said in a deep voice, "Don't underestimate the enemy. There are still dragon disciples nearby." The power of a duchy was not that weak. If they had not caught the Duke of Red Dragon's wife off guard, they would have had to ask Gloria to open the portal to support them. There was a portal in the captain's room of the Dead Man's Voice. It was connected to the laboratory in the Outer Islands. Gloria could teleport to the ghost ship at any time through the portal. This was why Soren was not afraid. There was a burst of cheers. The defeated enemy made Soren's men braver and fiercer. Many pirates raised their weapons and cheered for victory. However, the next moment, their cheers came to an abrupt end. This was because a huge wave had appeared in the distance. It was a huge wave that was as tall as a 10-story building. This huge wave was like a blue sky curtain approaching the battlefield. The huge wave that was dozens of miles long enveloped everyone within it. Under the huge wave, no warship could survive. They would be easily lifted and smashed like paper and eventually sink to the bottom of the sea. Tsunami, legendary spell. The huge wave pushed forward like a wall. In front of it, all the warships were so small. The cheers turned into screams. All the pirates on the battlefield, regardless of whether they were enemies or allies, were like headless flies. They were all covered by the legendary spell, Tsunami. The eastern pirates, who were the fastest at the beginning, had already brought their warships close to the range of the Tsunami spell. Under the huge waves of more than 10 stories high, their warships were overturned like toys. They did not even have the chance to make a splash. They were directly smashed into pieces and sank into the sea. There was basically not much chance of survival for the sailors on board. Damn Naga Siren Priest. Soren's face was quite ugly at the moment. He seemed to be angry and roared, "Didn't she say that the Naga Siren royal family would not do anything?" Tsunami. The signature spell of the Naga Siren. In the whole south coast area, except for the priests of the sea goddess, Soren could not think of anyone else who could cast this terrible legendary spell. This spell had the ability to destroy a port city. Maybe it could not threaten a strong man like Soren. After all, he had many ways to save his life in the face of a tsunami. But the men he brought, the fleets under his command, the defeated enemies, and the spoils of war were almost impossible to be intact under such a terrible tsunami. If the power of this tsunami broke out, even the raging sand island behind would be submerged. The huge wave of more than 10 stories high was enough to destroy everything. Soren's victory would eventually become a ruin. Rewind time to 5 minutes ago. Somewhere on the bottom of the sea, a group of heavily armed Naga guards were scattered around. In the middle was a group of female Naga with a strange face. In front of them was a mirror made of seawater. "Your Excellency." A female Naga sorcerer looked at the mirror and said slowly, "Ashrad has failed. He was killed by the throat cutter." A cold snort rang out, followed by a cold voice that slowly spoke from behind, "That useless trash. He was afraid to deal with the Swamp King, and now he is still useless against the throat cutter. Get ready to cast. Let these humans be buried in the sea." The Naga wizard next to her nodded, and then a strange chant sounded. This was the language of the sea Naga. As they chanted, a huge wave gradually rose from the sea. The height of the wave was getting more and more amazing. In the end, it almost turned into a blue sky and pushed forward. Sea Temple. In front of the Naga Siren priest was a mirror made of seawater. Her expression at the moment was quite complicated. She seemed to be hesitating and struggling. Her eyes were locked on the approaching tsunami waves in the mirror. It seemed that she was making a difficult choice. "Your Excellency." A low voice came from the dark sea and said slowly, "If your Excellency is not willing to do it, it is better to let them be killed by the tsunami. Most of the elite pirates on the south coast have gathered here. If they all die in battle, even if the throat cutter survives, there will be no one to use. In this way we can take the opportunity to gain more benefits." The Naga Siren priest shook her head gently and said, "It is difficult to kill them with tsunami. At most, it can only kill the mortals present and destroy all the warships. But in that way the forces on the south coast will become a vacuum. This may not be a good thing for us. Let the others get ready to cast. We need to pray for the incarnation of the sea goddess to come." The terrible tsunami was approaching. Many people closed their eyes in despair and firmly grasped the hull of the ship. Under this terrible wave, they could only pray for fate because they had no way to escape within the range of tsunami. Fly. 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 When the terrible tsunami appeared, Soren and others had already cast spells quickly. The few spell slots could not save so many people. Even if Vivian and Fallen which were present, they could only use fly to bring a few people to the sky. The terrible tsunami was getting closer and closer. The huge wave of more than 10 stories high made people feel desperate and suffocated. But when the tsunami in front of them was about to sweep them away, suddenly there was a strange sound of a conch. A wave rose from the center of the battlefield, and the sea water stirred like a whirlpool. The blue sea water automatically gathered into a figure that was more than 10 meters tall. She stood in the middle of the whirlpool, holding a trident in her hand. She gently pointed at the tsunami that was sweeping toward her. Then, the huge wave in front of her gradually disappeared, as if everything that had happened just now was an illusion. The Sea Temple. There was a dull voice in the sea and slowly said, "Your Excellency. The other sea priests have been summoned. You can cast the spell now." "Your Excellency? Your Excellency?" The voice in the sea seemed to be a little anxious. A strange tentacle appeared in the dark and deep darkness. The Naga Siren priest still stood in place, but at this moment, the expression on her face was stiff, and there was a faint feeling of panic brewing. It was because in the mirror image formed by the seawater in front of her, the figure of a goddess holding a trident appeared. She stood in the middle of the whirlpool as if she was the ruler of the sea. As she raised her hand and gently pointed forward, the shocking tsunami dissipated into nothingness. The sea goddess. The Naga Siren priest felt cold at the moment. Her heart was full of fear because she had not yet cast the spell to pray for the incarnation of the sea goddess to come. The incarnation of the sea goddess in front of her appeared by herself. What did this mean? Just thinking about it made her tremble and she could not help but panic. Back to a week ago. Soren was preparing for the decisive battle with the pirate king Ashrad. Because of the experience of defeating the Swamp King last time, he held a very simple sacrificial ceremony before leading the fleet to set off. This was really a very simple sacrificial ceremony. The sacrifice was to the sea goddess. Soren didn't even say a few words of prayer. In general, he was ready to give the head of the pirate king Ashrad to the sea goddess and dedicate this battle to her as a sacrifice. It was that simple. After all, Soren still needed the blessing of the sea goddess. Anyway, this battle was inevitable, so it was better to greet the sea goddess in advance. Maybe there would be additional benefits if he won. When he killed the Swamp King, Soren had the blessing of the sea goddess, so his prayer was different from ordinary believers. It was not even lighter than the prayers of the priests. If he prayed for the sacrifice, the sea goddess would definitely hear it, because the blessing and favor of the gods was equivalent to deepening the connection between the two. The sea goddess could perceive Soren's prayer, and even pay more attention to it than ordinary sea priests. As for whether the sea goddess liked his sacrifice, and whether she would listen to his prayer, no one knew. After all, the sea goddess was also known to be temperamental. The terrible tsunami gradually dissipated. The frightened pirates raised their heads and looked forward. When they saw the figure of the sea goddess standing in the whirlpool, the black heads knelt down, and some people prayed in a trembling voice. The incarnation of the gods had come to the mortal world. The sea goddess did not come in person. It was just a temporary body made of seawater. She did not care about the mortals kneeling on the deck, but turned her eyes to Soren not far away. The gaze of the gods. As if there was endless pressure, the sea goddess glanced at Soren, and then seemed to be quite satisfied and nodded gently. She raised the trident in her hand and pointed forward, and then saw the three-headed sea snake with 3 heads curled up from the bottom of the sea. It seemed to have heard something and gradually swam to Soren, and lowered its head like a servant. The whirlpool gradually shrank. The incarnation of the sea goddess looked into the distance, and her brows seemed to be slightly frowning. Then her figure dissipated in the whirlpool and turned back into the blue sea water. Everything just now was like an illusion. This is a good activity where a pie falls from the sky. Cool phones are waiting for you. Click on the Chinese network's public account, add friends on WeChat, add a public account, type Kdred, and participate now. Everyone has a prize. Now follow Kdred's WeChat public account. Chapter 361. P.S. Look at the exclusive story behind Lord of the Abyss. Listen to more suggestions for the novel. Pay attention to the Chinese network's public account. Add friends on WeChat. Add public account. Type Kdred. And tell me quietly. Under the dark night sky. Soren stood on the dock of Raging Sand Island and looked into the distance. This night was destined to be a happy one and a sad one. Soren certainly defeated the pirate king Ashrod and unified the pirate forces on the south coast in one fell swoop. But because of today's battle, he completely offended the Naga Siren royal family and the Principality of Rossard. The Naga Siren royal family was a little better. As long as the sea goddess did not fall, these Naga Siren royal family would at most secretly make some small moves. They would not dare to blatantly attack Soren. But the wife of the Duke of Red Dragon of the Principality of Rossard was hard to say. This woman was not only a legendary dragon disciple, but also mastered the resurrection spell Life Hiding. The difficulty of killing her was almost the same as the difficulty of challenging a saint. The Naga Siren. Soren did not know much about them in his memory. He only remembered that they were a matriarchal society and there was once a god. But this god later became an evil creature. It seemed to be something called a banshee. In Soren's original memory, the Naga Siren did trigger some legendary level quests. But there was a powerful sea goddess above them, and all their actions ended in failure. In other words, they were an existence that could not make waves, so Soren did not pay much attention to them. At the same time, just as Soren was worried about the threat of the Naga Siren royal family and the future revenge of the Principality of Rossard, the Naga Siren priest in the sea temple was not having a good time. Because when she saw the incarnation of the sea goddess appear, she realized that she had done something wrong. She had always been afraid that Soren's power would be too strong, and eventually the sea temple would not be able to control him, and it would become a situation where they could not get rid of him. But the worry in her eyes was insignificant for the gods. The sea goddess did not care whether there was a pirate king outside the temple. She only cared about whether the pirate king was useful to her. If one were to look at it from this point of view, Soren played an important role in the battle. First of all, he killed the Swamp King who worshipped the demon lord of the abyss, Dagon. This was equivalent to clearing out the enemy's pawns in the sea and using the enemy's head to please the moody ocean goddess. After that, Soren opened up the outer islands. As the ocean goddess's blessing, Soren's actions of opening up the outer islands gathered a large number of people, which also meant that he was indirectly spreading her faith and accumulating a large number of believers. For example, many of the pirates believed in the goddess of the sea, but they were not fanatics. Then Soren defeated Ashrod. This bloody massacre took place on the ocean. It could be understood as a sacrificial ritual for an evil god. The goddess of ocean was a god of the chaotic evil camp. Her joy and anger were unpredictable like the ocean. Therefore she would not reject this kind of sacrificial ritual at all. On the contrary, she might even like it. From the beginning to the end. Although Soren was growing stronger, he also brought benefits to the goddess of the sea. In this way, the actions of the Naga Siren priest were a bit incompetent. The high gods would not feel that Soren was a threat. The one who felt that Soren was a threat was the Naga Siren priest. Therefore, all the actions of the Naga Siren priest to limit the development of Soren had become a reverse restriction on the expansion of the goddess of the sea's influence. If this was the case, the Naga Siren priest's current position was a bit dangerous. The goddess of the sea did not respond to her prayers. But at this time, she directly sent her avatar to help Soren through the crisis. This meant that Soren's position in her heart was higher than the Naga Siren priest who was in charge of the sea temple. Gods were very realistic most of the time. The goddess of the sea did not care how ambitious Soren was or whether he wanted to be higher than the Naga Siren priest. She only cared about whether Soren could expand her influence and spread her faith further. The outer islands were a breakthrough. If the outer islands became a breakthrough point of faith, she would have put a nail into the territory of the storm god. Soren was more useful than the Naga Siren priest. Now, after seeing the avatar of the goddess of the sea appear today, the Naga Siren priest gradually realized this in her heart. The goddess of the sea would not care whether Soren was stronger than the sea temple because Soren's power was very weak compared to the sea temple, and for the gods, it was difficult to think that a mortal would be too strong to be a threat. The worry of the Naga Siren priest was not the concern of the goddess of the sea. On the contrary, her behavior during this time was very likely to cause the displeasure of the goddess of the sea. At the thought of this, the Naga Siren priest felt cold all over. She had always been worried that Soren's strength was too strong, and in the end the sea temple could not control and restrain him. But she did not think that Soren's strength would gradually increase his status in the eyes of the goddess of the sea. He might even be on the same level as her. This was like Soren's power struggle between the half-elf first mate and the red-haired female pirate Adele. He didn't care who wanted to suppress who. What he cared about was who could do what he told them to do. So the half-elf first mate was promoted, and the red-haired female pirate who failed the mission was deprived of some of her power. Because for Soren, no matter how the two fought, they could not threaten his rule. The same was true for the goddess of the sea. A quiet night. Soren stood on the tower and looked at the night sky. The stars in the sky had become dimmer, and many stars looked gray. This meant that some gods could no longer stabilize their divinity. It would not be long before the divine kingdoms represented by these gray stars would be stripped, and then the gods in charge of these kingdoms would fall to the mortal world one by one. The time of troubles was coming. The stars under the night sky were getting dimmer and dimmer. Many people had noticed this and realized the coming chaos. Brother. Vivian's footsteps came from behind. The little girl was wearing a white dress. It seemed that she had changed her clothes today. Soren turned around and smiled. The little girl walked to his side, raised her little white hand and held one of Soren's fingers. Just like when they were young, she stood beside him and whispered, "What are you thinking about? Since leaving Amber City, you like to look at the sky more than before." Soren reached out and hugged her petite body, kissed her gently on the forehead and said softly, "Nothing." He looked up at the moon. The power of the Lady of Silver Moon was also declining, and the night did not seem to be affected much. "Brother." Vivian leaned her little head on Soren's shoulder, and her little body sat on his arm. She whispered, "Vivian has grown up. I have become stronger than before. No matter what happens, I will be with you. Vivian can help you." "Really?" The little girl nodded seriously, and her expression was unprecedentedly serious. The moonlight was bright. Soren was smiling, holding the little Vivian tightly in his arms. He looked up at the moon and murmured in his heart, "Lady of Silver Moon, I don't know what fate will arrange. Can I avoid this battle with you?" New Moon Year 1677, September late. The Witch of Fear, Lillian, died in the hands of the Lady of Silver Moon. There were only a few Sons of Fear left. The time of troubles officially began, and the saints of the gods tore the earth apart. It was now New Moon Year 1676, February, the middle of the year. In about 3 months, the first batch of gods with weak divine power would fall to the mortal world as saints, and demons would frequently appear all over the world. Soren had been walking fast enough, but he still felt that time was tight. From Amber City to the outer islands, although his strength had increased by leaps and bounds, the time of troubles was getting closer and closer. When the gods with great divine power also fell to the mortal world as saints, it meant that the unprecedented time of troubles had officially begun. He used to like the moon very much. But when he knew Vivian's identity, the moonlight that represented the Lady of Silver Moon was a thorn in his heart. What a good event for a pie in the sky. Cool phones are waiting for you. Click on the Chinese network's official account, add friends on WeChat, add a public account, type Kdred, and participate now. Everyone has a prize, follow the official account of Kdred now. Chapter 362. P.S. Read the exclusive story behind Lord of the Abyss, and listen to more suggestions for the novel. Pay attention to the Chinese website's official account, add friends on WeChat, add official account, type Kdred, and tell me secretly. The next day, the whole Raging Sand Island was busy. Soren captured a large number of captives in this battle, and many pirates immediately surrendered when they saw that the situation was not right. In addition, the incarnation of the sea goddess appeared and eliminated the tsunami spell, so these pirates were even more in awe of Soren. However, because it was already late, Soren was worried that there would be trouble, so he could only lock them all up and block the warehouse of Raging Sand Island. Those were the materials that the pirate king Ashrod had transported. In addition to a large number of food and equipment, there was also Kindler to reward his subordinates. It had to be said that Ashrod was indeed better than Soren when it came to accumulating wealth. This guy was in charge of the eastern route and had the support of the Naga royal family. At the same time, he also robbed Soren of the spoils of war from Devil Island. In the treasure house of Raging Sand Island, there were more than 200,000 Kindler alone, and there were also a lot of pearls. There were special pearl divers in the east, and Ashrod probably collected hundreds and thousands of pearls in this way. Soren could not take this wealth for himself. Nearly half of it had to be used to reward his subordinates. After all, his subordinates had hundreds of casualties. In a naval battle, at most half of the people on a ship could survive if it was sunk. Occupying Raging Sand Island was just the beginning. The pirate king Ashrod had died in Soren's hands, so he naturally needed to take over the other party's territory. At the same time, because of occupying the eastern route, Soren's pirate leaders also had to be transferred. Managing the eastern route was a very time-consuming and laborious task. The pirate king Ashrod had been killed, but some of his leaders had survived, so it was inevitable that there would be resistance. Therefore, after some consideration, Soren decided to let the most capable half-elf first mate manage the eastern route. This guy was ruthless and decisive. In this period, he was the fastest candidate to stabilize the situation. As for the men assigned to him, the pirates under Scarface had suffered heavy casualties, and the one-eyed man was also a ruthless character. Both of them had to stay here to guard the eastern sea route. The men Soren left behind were all very murderous. The eastern sea route had just been taken over, and only a cruel rule could make others fear it. The fighting strength of these three guys was also top-notch. As for the others, Port Tylon, Shipwreck Bay, and Motor City could not be left aside. Soren had to promote another group of elite pirates to fill the vacant positions. Pirate King Ashrod had many spoils of war. However, Soren's loot might not even be comparable to the 3 pieces of equipment dropped by the Duke of Red Dragon's wife when she was killed. This was because she had dropped legendary equipment after her death. Item type: Wizard Ring, +1, item grade, Tier 1 legendary, item description. This is a very special sorcerer's ring. It can only increase spell slots by 1 circle. Legend has it that it was personally made by a special sorcerer. The owner of this ring was a crazy sorcerer. In order to increase the number of level 1 spell slots he had spent a lot of time to create this special legendary Tier 1 item to memorize the Berserk Wizard's unique level 1 spell, Reckless Movement Curse. This item had fallen into the hands of many people, but in the end, only the Frenzied Wizard could exert its greatest power. Requirements: none. Effect: double the spell slots of 1 circle. This was the first legendary equipment dropped by the Duke of Red Dragon's wife. It was also a very famous legendary equipment. For the Berserk Sorcerer, this grade 1 legendary item was equivalent to an extremely powerful artifact. This was mainly because the Frenzied Wizard had a special Tier 1 spell called Frenzied Wizard. Frenzied Wizard, Tier 1 spell. A special spell that only the Frenzied Wizard can master. The power of chaos can cause unknown changes in magic. The Frenzied Wizard can try to use the Tier 1 spell, Frenzied Wizard, to replace any spells he can master, including the legendary spells he has mastered. However, the frenzied wizard must go through a difficult chaos test after casting the spell. If the chaos test is wrong, something unimaginable may happen. Note: you can use a chaos barrier to increase the success rate of the test. The frenzied wizard. A group of people who studied chaos magic and behaved like a lunatic. They were very few in number and most of them died under their own spells. However, there were occasionally some terrifying frenzied wizards, especially after entering the realm of legends. They were a crazy existence that could single-handedly challenge a group of legendary wizards or turn over a plane in the abyss by themselves. Chaos had already seeped into their souls, and any spells cast by the frenzied wizard could be mutated. They could use their unique Tier 1 spell, Frenzied Wizard, to replace any spells. As long as they successfully passed the chaos test, they could cast as many spells as they wanted. In theory, if they were invincible, they were invincible. However, if they weren't lucky enough, the spell they cast could directly petrify them, turn them into frogs, or be struck by lightning, or some other strange and unimaginable things. Soren had only seen a few frenzied wizards alive so far. This legendary equipment was their artifact. It could double the number of Tier 1 spells they could cast, and then use it to simulate any spells they had mastered. For now. Whether it was Soren or Vivian, they could not use it to its full potential, so it did not matter who held it. However, Vivian was a sorcerer, and her Tier 1 spell slots were calculated separately. If she wore this equipment, then Vivian's Tier 1 spell slots would increase by about 15 Tier 1 spell slots. Even if it was used to memorize arcane missiles, the lethality would be quite amazing. So, unsurprisingly, this equipment was given to Vivian to wear. The second equipment was a bit more amazing. It was also a ring, but it was a famous ring, because it could be said to be the closest to a divine artifact or even better. Item type: Lich Ring, +5, item grade, Tier 5 legendary item, item description. This is a ring made by a legendary lich. It is engraved with an extremely complex magic formation. It can make the wearer immune to any poison, disease, and at the same time increase the wearer's resistance to charm spells and mind control spells. A special alchemy technique was used on this ring. It could strengthen the spellcaster's ability and increase their casting speed by 1 second when casting any spell. However, please note that this ring is shrouded in the power of the undead. There is a special curse on it that may reduce the wearer's vitality. Equipment requirements: Vitality 10 and above. Equipment special effect: Cursed item. After equipping, the wearer's vitality will be reduced by 2 points. The wearer cannot remove the ring after wearing it. Note: undead are immune to the effects of curses. Equipment effect 1: Poison immunity. This ring has a special power that allows the wearer to be immune to any poison attack. Whether it is an alchemy poison, a natural poison, or a poison attack caused by magic, the wearer will be completely immune to the damage caused by them, as well as other negative effects such as paralysis, rigidity, and so on. Equipment effect 2: Disease immunity. This ring has a special power that allows the wearer to be immune to any disease attack. Whether it is a disease caused by magic or a disease infected by the wearer, it will not have any effect on the wearer. Even the most terrible plague will not be able to threaten the wearer of this ring. Any disease spells will be ineffective on the wearer. Equipment effect 3: Increase the wearer's resistance to charm spells and mind control spells by 2 points. Equipment effect 4: Increase the casting speed by 1 point. Equipment effect 5: Additional level 6 spell slot, level 7 spell slot. Equipment effect 6: Greater haste, can be used once a day. Equipment effect 7: Increase the wearer's magic resistance by 10 points. Equipment effect 8: Increase the wearer's regenerative ability. Base HP recovery rate per hour +1. Equipment effect 9: Defense level +2. That's right. This was the legendary Lich Ring. The highest level Soren had seen before was only +2, so when he saw the +5 Lich Ring, he was almost stunned. The value of this ring was simply immeasurable. It was a legendary item that could not be measured by money. It could be said that any of Soren's spoils of war paled in comparison to this ring. To a certain extent, it was even more powerful than a divine artifact. However, it was also very dangerous to carry this equipment around. This was because the prophecy spell could locate the wearer's position. Many wizards, dragons, and special life forms liked to use spells to track the wearer's position. It was fine if he wore it in the base, but if he took it out, the Duke of Red Dragon's wife would most likely track him down. This was because its magic aura was too strong. It was strong enough to allow others to cross planes to locate it. This was equivalent to a divine artifact. Its existence might even be very interesting to the gods who knew about it. Therefore, after Soren recognized this equipment, the first thing he did was to ask the Fallen Witch Kalina to seal its magic aura. The Northern Witch was proficient in prophecy spells and had many means to prevent others from tracking it down. Unless someone was bored enough to use a legendary prophecy spell to track it down for the time being, no one could determine its position. As for the last equipment, compared to the +5 Lich Ring, it could simply be ignored. This is a good activity where a pie falls from the sky. Cool phones are waiting for you. Click on the Chinese network's official account, add friends on WeChat, add a public account, type Kdred, and participate now. There's a prize for everyone. Follow Kdred's official account now. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.